The spotlights dimmed as Brahms's Symphony No. 4 prepared to begin, and Ji-hoon Park found himself separated from his security detail in the packed charity gala auditorium. The Seoul Philharmonic was tuning their instruments on stage, while Seoul's elite shuffled into their assigned seats, champagne glasses clinking softly against designer jewelry. Ji-hoon's assistant had his ticket, somewhere in the crowd behind him, but the conductor was already raising his baton. "Excuse me?" he whispered in English to a black woman in a navy medical coat who was studying a musical score with ink-stained fingers. "Is this seat free?" She looked up with honey-colored eyes that seemed to catch every reflection from the stage lights. Her natural hair was pulled back in a low bun, and a stethoscope hung around her neck like an elegant necklace. She smiled. Not the practiced smile he was accustomed to receiving from people who recognized his face from business magazines, but something genuine and warm. "It is now," she replied, closing her annotated score and moving her small purse to make room. As he settled into the velvet seat, Ji-hoon realized he hadn't introduced himself with his full name and title for the first time in years. The orchestra began, and she leaned slightly toward him during the second movement, whispering, "Listen for the oboe solo coming up." Brahms hid the melody in the lower register. She was right. When the haunting melody emerged exactly where she'd predicted, Ji-hoon felt something unlock in his chest that had been closed for longer than he cared to admit. For 2 hours, they shared quiet observations about the music, her medical training evident in how she described the heartbeat rhythm of the timpani, his business acumen showing when he noted the calculated chaos of the finale. When the lights came up and the audience rose for a standing ovation, she turned to him with that same genuine smile. "Thank you for the company, J.H. Maya." He repeated her name like a prayer, watching as she gathered her things. "Thank you for the oboe." She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, and disappeared into the crowd of Seoul's medical elite heading toward the reception area. Ji-hoon stood frozen in the emptying auditorium, his Patek Philippe watch catching the stage lights as he realized that for the first time in 15 years of running Park Healthcare Technology, he hadn't thought once about quarterly projections, board meetings, or the hospital closure list waiting in his briefcase. That night, more than just the chair was free. If you're already wondering whether a billionaire CEO can truly change for love, or if a dedicated doctor can trust someone whose empire might destroy everything she's worked to protect, then you won't want to miss what happens when these two worlds collide in ways neither of them saw coming. 3 days later, Ji-hoon found himself walking past Mercy General Hospital at 5:47 a.m., telling himself it was coincidence that his morning run had taken this particular route through the medical district. The truth sat heavier in his stomach than his usual black coffee. He'd spent the weekend researching every Dr. Maya or Dr. Monroe in Seoul's hospital system. Dr. Serenity Monroe, 41, Emergency Medicine, Mercy General Hospital, Research Specialization, Triage Protocol Development. Published papers on resource allocation during medical emergencies. No social media presence. No scandal. No connections to his world of corporate healthcare. Perfect. The lobby smelled like industrial disinfectant and hope. Through the glass doors of the emergency department, he could see her moving between patients with the same precision she'd shown following Brahms' complex musical arrangements. A young boy clutched his mother's hand while Dr. Monroe knelt to his eye level, her stethoscope catching the fluorescent light. "Can I help you, sir?" The security guard's question jolted him back to reality. Ji-hoon realized he'd been standing in the lobby for 10 minutes, wearing a $1,000 running outfit, staring at the emergency room like some kind of stalker. "I was looking for information about volunteer opportunities," he lied smoothly. "3rd floor, community relations. Elevators to your right." Ji-hoon took the elevator, knowing he wouldn't stop at the 3rd floor. As the doors opened on the ground level again, he nearly collided with Dr. Monroe herself, 2 cups of vending machine coffee balanced in her hands. "J.H.?" She looked genuinely surprised, though not displeased. "What brings you to Mercy at 6 in the morning?" "Coffee," he said, gesturing to her cups. though yours looks significantly better than mine." She laughed that wind chime laugh. "Hospital vending machine coffee is notorious for being terrible. I was bringing this to Marcus. He's been here for 18 hours straight." She paused, studying his running gear. "But you don't look like you need caffeine. More like you need sleep." "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd run." "Through the medical district?" "Apparently." Their eyes met, and Ji-hoon felt that same unlocking sensation from the concert hall. Dr. Monroe, Serenity, he reminded himself, shifted both coffee cups to one hand. "Marcus can wait 5 minutes," she said. "Want to see something interesting?" She led him through a corridor he hadn't noticed before, past patient rooms where monitors beeped steadily and families maintained bedside vigils. At the end of the hall, she pushed open a door marked "Staff Only" that opened onto a small rooftop garden. Seoul sprawled below them in the early morning light, glass towers catching the sunrise while street vendors prepared for the day. The hospital's helipad sat empty on the adjacent building, and somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. "This is where I come when I need to remember why I became a doctor," Serenity said, settling onto a metal bench beside a small herb garden. "Rosemary for remembrance, sage for wisdom, mint for mojitos on my days off." Ji-hoon sat beside her, careful to maintain proper distance while fighting the urge to close it entirely. "How long have you been at Mercy?" 8 years. "You? Running? Working in healthcare?" The question hit closer to home than she knew. 15 years officially. 25 if you count growing up in it. Family business? Something like that. He watched her pull a small notebook from her coat pocket and make a quick note. "What are you writing?" "Patient protocol ideas. They come at weird times." She looked up from her writing. "The boy you saw downstairs, 7 years old, possible concussion from falling off his bike. But his mother was more anxious than he was, so I'm noting that we need better family counseling protocols for pediatric emergencies. You study people. I study systems, people, protocols, processes, how to make them work better under pressure." She closed the notebook. "What do you study?" Ji-hoon considered lying again, but something about the morning light and her direct gaze made dishonesty feel impossible. "Markets, efficiency, how to make things profitable." "Sounds lonely." "It can be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Seoul wake up below them. A helicopter approached the helipad, and Serenity automatically checked her watch. "That'll be a trauma case from the highway," she said, already standing. "Helicopter only comes for the serious ones. You have to go." "I have to go." But she didn't move immediately. "JH? Yes? Next time you can't sleep, there's a 24-hour cafe called Constellation on 5th Street. Better coffee than hospital vending machines, and they have excellent acoustic guitar music on Wednesday nights." "Is that an invitation?" "It's information. What you do with it is your choice." She was halfway to the door when she turned back. "And JH? Thanks for not asking why I was alone at a charity concert. Thanks for not asking why I was running through the medical district at dawn." After she disappeared through the door, Ji-hoon remained on the rooftop for another 20 minutes, watching the helicopter land and the trauma team spring into action. From 6 floors up, Dr. Serenity Monroe looked like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of organized chaos, every movement purposeful, every decision critical. His phone buzzed with messages from his assistant Lee So-young about the morning's board meeting, but for the first time in his professional life, Ji-hoon Park let the messages wait. Wednesday night found Ji-hoon sitting in Constellation Cafe at 9:47 p.m., pretending to read financial reports while actually listening for the door chime that might announce Serenity's arrival. The acoustic guitarist, a college student with calloused fingers and a voice like honey, was halfway through a Jeff Buckley cover when she walked in. She'd traded her medical coat for a simple black dress and cardigan, her hair loose around her shoulders. When she spotted him in the corner booth, her smile was worth every agonizing hour he'd spent wondering if she would actually come. "You took the information," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Best coffee recommendation I've received all week. What else happened this week? Ji-hoon closed his laptop. Board meetings, financial projections, a conference call with investors in Tokyo. All true, though he omitted the part about spending 3 hours researching her published papers on emergency triage protocols. 17-hour surgery on a construction worker, grant applications, a presentation to the hospital administration about updating our trauma response procedures. She paused as the waitress approached. And I spent an embarrassing amount of time wondering if you'd actually be here. Same. They ordered coffee. She preferred Ethiopian single origin. He drank his black, and settled into the kind of conversation that felt like discovery. She told him about growing up in Chicago, daughter of a postal worker and a high school mathematics teacher, about medical school at Northwestern, and her residency in Detroit's emergency rooms. He shared carefully edited stories about business school and living in Seoul, about the pressure of family expectations and the isolation that came with success. What made you specialize in emergency medicine? He asked. Control, she said without hesitation. In the emergency room, you have maybe 30 seconds to make a decision that could save someone's life. There's no time for committee meetings or second opinions or office politics. You see the problem, you fix it, you move on to the next one. That sounds terrifying. It sounds honest. She stirred sugar into her coffee. What made you go into healthcare? The question was innocent enough, but it landed like a physical blow. Ji-hoon found himself at the edge of a conversational cliff, looking down at truths he couldn't tell her. That Park Healthcare Technology was one of Korea's largest medical conglomerates, that his company owned 17 hospitals and was currently negotiating to acquire 12 more, that the quarterly report sitting in his laptop bag contained a recommendation to close unprofitable community hospitals, including quite possibly hers. Family legacy, he said finally. Sometimes you inherit a path instead of choosing one. Do you like it? I'm good at it. That's not the same thing. The guitarist began a new song, something melancholy in a minor key, and Ji-hoon felt exposed in ways that had nothing to do with the cafe's warm lighting. Why emergency medicine specifically? He asked, deflecting. Not surgery or internal medicine. Because emergency medicine is where you see people at their most real. No pretense, no games, no hidden agendas. When someone's life is on the line, everything else falls away. She leaned forward slightly. You see who people really are when they think they might lose everything. And who are they? Mostly, they're terrified and brave and completely human. Rich, poor, powerful. Nobody, in the emergency room, everyone bleeds the same color. Ji-hoon thought about the board meeting from that morning, where Director Kang Min-seok had presented his analysis of underperforming medical facilities with the clinical detachment of the accountant reviewing quarterly losses. Mercy General had appeared on slide 14. Declining profit margins, aging infrastructure, located in an economically disadvantaged area of Seoul. What if someone wanted to help? He asked carefully. Your hospital, I mean. If someone had resources and wanted to make a difference. Help how? Funding, equipment, whatever you needed. Serenity's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. Why would you ask that? Because you clearly care about your work, and I'd like to help if I could. JH. She set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. I need you to understand something about me. I've been working in hospitals long enough to know that when wealthy strangers offer to help, there's usually a catch. So before this conversation goes any further, I need to know, what's your real interest in Mercy General? The question hung between them like a challenge. Ji-hoon could feel the weight of potential honesty pressing against his chest. The relief that would come from telling her everything, balanced against the certainty that the truth would end whatever was beginning between them. My interest is in you, he said finally. I met someone remarkable at a concert, and I'd like to get to know her better. If that includes learning about her work, then I want to understand what matters to her. Serenity studied his face for a long moment. And that's all? That's all. She relaxed slightly, But Ji-hoon could see he'd damaged something fragile with his question about helping the hospital. The rest of their evening was pleasant but careful, full of safer topics like music and books and favorite places in Seoul. When they parted ways outside the cafe at midnight, Serenity touched his arm briefly. "JH, thank you for a lovely evening. But if we're going to be friends? If we're going to be whatever we're going to be, I need you to know that I don't mix personal relationships with hospital business. Ever. People I care about don't get to save my workplace, and my workplace doesn't get to interfere with people I care about." "Understood." "Good." She smiled, and some of the warmth returned. "Same time next week? I'll be here." As he watched her disappear into the Seoul night, Ji-hoon realized he'd just made a promise he might not be able to keep. In 18 hours, he had a meeting with the board about the hospital closure recommendations. Mercy General's fate would be decided in a conference room 40 floors above the city, and Dr. Serenity Monroe would never know that the man she was beginning to trust held her future in his hands. His phone buzzed with a text from So Young. "Board meeting moved to 8 a.m. tomorrow. Kang wants to expedite the hospital recommendations." Ji-hoon stared at the message until the screen went dark, then began the long walk home through streets that suddenly felt much colder. The Park Healthcare Technology boardroom occupied the entire 42nd floor of Seoul's newest skyscraper, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city that included, from this height, a clear sightline to Mercy General Hospital's modest 7-story building nestled among the urban sprawl. Ji-hoon arrived at 7:45 a.m. to find director Kang Min-seok already setting up his presentation, his gold-rimmed glasses catching the morning light as he arranged documents with military precision. The other board members filed in with their usual blend of expensive suits and practiced expressions, men and women who'd built careers on making difficult decisions about other people's lives. "Good morning, CEO Park," Kang said with the sort of smile that never reached his eyes. "I trust you've reviewed the financial projections for our hospital consolidation proposal?" "I've reviewed them." Ji-hoon took his seat at the head of the conference table, his father's chair, inherited along with the responsibility of maintaining the Park family's medical empire. "Walk me through your recommendations." Kang activated the presentation screen. Phase 1 involves closing 12 underperforming facilities throughout Seoul metropolitan area. Combined annual losses: 8.2 billion won. Projected savings after closure: 12.4 billion won annually. The first slide showed a map of Seoul with red dots marking hospitals targeted for closure. Ji-hoon's chest tightened as he recognized the location of Mercy General among them. "These facilities," Kang continued, "serve primarily low-income populations with limited private insurance. Converting the properties to mixed-use development, in partnership with Golden Tower Development, would generate significantly higher returns on our real estate investments." Board member Kim raised her hand. "What about the communities these hospitals serve?" "Alternative facilities exist within reasonable distance," Kang replied smoothly. "We've conducted extensive analysis of patient flow patterns and transportation accessibility." "Define reasonable distance," Ji-hoon said quietly. "An average of 12.3 kilometers to the nearest comparable emergency facility." 12 kilometers. In Seoul traffic, that could mean 30 minutes or 2 hours, depending on the time of day. Ji-hoon thought about the helicopter that had landed at Mercy General during his rooftop conversation with Serenity, about the trauma cases where minutes could mean the difference between life and death. "What about the medical staff?" asked board member Lee. "Approximately 60% would be absorbed into our remaining facilities. The others would need to seek employment elsewhere. As if 40% of skilled medical professionals were simply interchangeable resources to be relocated or discarded based on efficiency calculations. "CEO Park?" Kang was looking at him expectantly. "Do you have questions about the proposal?" Ji-hoon stared at the red dot marking Mercy General's location. In 18 hours, he'd be meeting Serenity at Constellation Cafe again, listening to her talk about the herb garden, where she went to remember why she became a doctor, about the systems she was developing to save more lives with fewer resources. "I have questions about our legal obligations," he said finally. "Community benefit requirements, staff contracts, patient transfer protocols. All handled, Kang assured him. Legal has confirmed we're in full compliance with closure regulations. The community benefit requirements can be met through our remaining facilities, and we've allocated funds for patient transfer costs. How much? 200 million won for transition support. Less than Ji-hoon had spent on his watch. Less than the board would spend on lunch this quarter. He looked around the table at faces that showed no emotion, no recognition that they were discussing the elimination of a place where real people worked and lived and fought to save lives. I need more time to review the details, Ji-hoon said. Kang's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, CEO Park. However, I should mention that Golden Tower has given us a deadline. Their development timeline requires a decision within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. The sooner we can confirm closure dates, the better our negotiating position for the property sales. After the meeting, Ji-hoon remained in the boardroom, staring out at the city, while the weight of inherited power pressed down on his shoulders. His father had built Park Healthcare Technology on the principle that medical care should be both excellent and profitable, but somewhere in the evolution from family business to corporate empire, profit had begun to matter more than the medical part. So Young knocked on the open door. Sir, you asked me to remind you about your lunch appointment. Cancel it. It's with the Minister of Health and Social Affairs. Reschedule it. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Sir, if you don't mind me asking, is everything all right? Ji-hoon turned from the window. So Young had been his assistant for 3 years, hired fresh from university with degrees in business administration, and an uncanny ability to anticipate his needs before he articulated them. She was also the daughter of a nurse who had died from a medical error at a private hospital, a fact she'd mentioned only once, during her initial interview, when explaining why she wanted to work in healthcare administration. So Young, what do you know about Mercy General Hospital? The community hospital in the Dongdaemun district? It's on Director Kang's closure list. What else? She hesitated. Sir, are you asking for my professional assessment or my personal opinion? Both. Professionally, it's underperforming financially compared to our flagship facilities. The patient population is primarily uninsured or underinsured. The building needs significant infrastructure updates, and the location doesn't align with our strategic expansion into affluent markets. And personally, So Young looked out the window toward the distant hospital. My mother might still be alive if she'd been taken to a place like Mercy General instead of a hospital that prioritized profit margins over patient care. The statement hung in the air between them like a confession. Sir, So Young continued carefully, may I ask why you're interested in this particular facility? Ji-hoon considered his options. So Young knew his schedule, his habits, his preference for Ethiopian coffee over the expensive blend served in the executive break room. If anyone was going to discover his extracurricular activities, it would be her. I've been learning about community medicine, he said finally, about doctors who choose to work in underserved areas despite better opportunities elsewhere. That's admirable, sir. Is it? Or is it just impractical? So Young studied him with the same intensity she brought to analyzing quarterly reports. Sir, with respect, I think those might be the same thing. And I think that might be exactly what's wrong with healthcare today. That evening, Ji-hoon arrived at Constellation Cafe early and spent an hour reviewing everything he could find about Dr. Serenity Monroe's research. Her papers on triage protocols were groundbreaking, systems that could reduce emergency room wait times by 30% while improving patient outcomes. Her work on resource allocation during natural disasters had been cited by medical journals worldwide. She was brilliant. She was dedicated. She was trying to save lives with the limited resources available to her. And in 13 days, if he signed Director Kang's recommendation, she would lose her job. When Serenity arrived at 9:30, she found him with his laptop closed and a fresh cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. You look like you've had a day, she said, settling into her usual seat. Long day. You? 3-year-old with a Lego stuck in his ear, elderly man with chest pain who turned out to be having a panic attack about his grandson's wedding, and a teenager who tried to pierce her own eyebrow with a safety pin. She signaled the waitress for her usual order. So, basically Wednesday. Do you ever get frustrated with the limitations? You mean the broken equipment, outdated computers, and supply closet that looks like it was stocked during the Korean War? That's not what I meant, but yes. Every day. Serenity leaned back in her chair. But frustration is just energy without direction. The question is what you do with it. What do you do with it? I write papers about better systems. I apply for grants that might never come through. I teach residents that being a good doctor isn't about having the best equipment. It's about making the best decisions with whatever you have. She paused. And I remind myself that every life we save matters, regardless of whether we save it with $1 million machine or a $20 stethoscope. Ji-hoon thought about the boardroom conversation, about red dots on maps and efficiency calculations that reduced human lives to statistics. Serenity? Yes? If you could change one thing about healthcare, not just your hospital, but the entire system, what would it be? She considered the question seriously. I'd eliminate the idea that some people's lives are worth more than others based on their ability to pay. Medical care should be a human right, not a luxury service. That sounds idealistic. It sounds civilized. Her honey-colored eyes met his. What would you change? The answer came to him with surprising clarity. I'd make sure that business decisions were made by people who understood that spreadsheets represent real human consequences. That sounds like experience talking. Maybe it is. The guitarist began a new song, something hopeful in a major key. And for a moment, Ji-hoon allowed himself to imagine a different kind of boardroom conversation. One where the red dots on the map remained hospitals, instead of becoming development opportunities. Where Dr. Serenity Monroe's research could flourish instead of disappearing along with the institution that supported it. J.H.? Serenity's voice drew him back to the present. Sorry, I was thinking about work. Must be serious work to put that expression on your face. Sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that look completely wrong on paper, but feel completely right in your heart. Something like that. As they talked through the evening, Ji-hoon found himself memorizing details. The way Serenity's face lit up when she described a successful surgery, the precise way she stirred sugar into her coffee, the small scar on her left hand from a childhood accident. He was falling in love with someone whose life he held the power to destroy, and the weight of that knowledge was becoming unbearable. When they parted ways outside the cafe, Serenity touched his arm again. J.H., whatever decision you're struggling with at work, trust yourself. You have a good heart. As he walked home through the empty streets of Seoul, Ji-hoon realized that Dr. Serenity Monroe was wrong about one thing. Having a good heart and making good decisions weren't the same thing at all. Friday morning brought rain to Seoul, the kind of steady downpour that turned the city's glass towers into abstract watercolor paintings. Ji-hoon stood in his penthouse apartment, watching droplets race each other down floor-to-ceiling windows, while his phone buzzed insistently with calls from Director Kang. He'd been avoiding the calls for 2 days. The hospital closure report sat on his dining room table next to an untouched breakfast prepared by his housekeeper. 12 facilities. Thousands of patients. Hundreds of jobs. One signature required to set the entire plan in motion. His doorbell chimed, a sound so rare in his carefully controlled existence that it took him a moment to recognize it. The security monitor showed So Young standing in the hallway, soaked from the rain, and clutching a manila folder against her chest. "I'm sorry to bother you at home, sir," she said when he opened the door. "But I found something you need to see." She was trembling. Whether from cold, rain, or fear, he couldn't tell. Ji-hoon handed her a towel and made fresh coffee while she composed herself at his dining room table. "I was filing quarterly reports yesterday when I noticed discrepancies in Director Kang's documentation," she began, opening the manila folder with fingers that shook slightly. Cost projections that didn't match previous assessments, property valuations that seemed inflated, timeline estimates that conflicted with legal requirements. Discrepancies how? "Sir, I think Director Kang has been manipulating data to make the hospital closures appear more financially necessary than they actually are. Ji-hoon sat down across from her. Show me. So Young spread documents across the table with the precision of a crime scene investigator. Financial reports, property assessments, patient flow analyses, all bearing Director Kang's signature and official Park Healthcare Technology letterhead. Look at these operating cost projections for Mercy General, she said, pointing to a highlighted section. Director Kang claims annual maintenance costs of 2.8 billion won, but the actual maintenance budget filed with the city is 1.4 billion won. Maybe he's accounting for future upgrades. That's what I thought initially. But look at this. She produced another document. This is a property assessment from Golden Tower Development, dated 3 weeks ago. They're valuing the Mercy General property at 15% above current market rates, but only if the hospital is closed and rezoned for mixed-use development. Ji-hoon studied the paperwork. Golden Tower has been in contact with Kang directly? According to these email records, they've been negotiating for 6 months, long before the board authorized any closure studies. The implications hit him like cold water. He's been planning this closure regardless of the hospital's actual performance. Sir, there's more. So Young's voice dropped to a whisper. I found similar discrepancies in the documentation for 8 of the 12 hospitals on the closure list. All of them have been contacted by development companies, all before any board authorization. Ji-hoon pushed back from the table, his mind racing through the legal and ethical implications. Director Kang wasn't just recommending hospital closures. He was orchestrating them for personal financial gain. So Young, how did you access Kang's private email records? She flushed. I may have, accidentally, been given administrator access to the financial database last month. When I discovered the discrepancies, I felt obligated to investigate further. You could lose your job. We could both lose our jobs. Yes, sir. Why risk it? So Young looked out the rain-streaked windows toward the distant medical district. Because my mother died in a hospital that prioritized profit over patients, and I can't watch it happen again, not when I have the power to prevent it. Ji-hoon stared at the evidence spread across his table. In the space of 20 minutes, his assistant had handed him the power to destroy Director Kang's career, save 12 hospitals, and expose a corruption scheme that reached into Seoul's development industry. She'd also handed him an impossible choice. Exposing Kang would require admitting that Park Healthcare Technology's board had been operating on falsified information. The scandal would damage the company's reputation, possibly trigger regulatory investigations, and certainly cost millions in legal fees and settlements. But allowing Kang's plan to proceed would mean closing hospitals that didn't need to be closed, destroying communities that depended on them, and enabling a level of corruption that violated everything Ji-hoon had been taught about ethical business practices. Sir, So Young was watching him carefully. What do you want me to do with this information? I need time to think. Director Kang is expecting your decision on Monday. I know. After So Young left, Ji-hoon spent the afternoon pacing his apartment, the rain continuing its steady assault on his windows. Every time his phone rang, he let it go to voicemail. Every time he looked at the documents So Young had left behind, he felt the weight of inherited responsibility pressing down harder. At 6 p.m., his phone buzzed with a text from Serenity. Emergency surgery running late. Rain check on dinner? He responded immediately. Of course. Hope everything goes well. Her reply came 5 minutes later. It will. That's what we do. That's what we do. Save lives, solve problems, make impossible decisions under pressure. Ji-hoon realized he'd been approaching his dilemma from the wrong angle. Not as a business problem requiring cost-benefit analysis, but as an emergency requiring immediate, decisive action. He called So Young. I need you to schedule a meeting with our legal department for first thing Monday morning, he said. And I need you to make copies of everything you found, multiple copies. Yes, sir. Sir? Yes? Are we going to stop him? Ji-hoon looked out at the city, at the lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. at the distant hospital where Dr. Serenity Monroe was probably still in surgery, still fighting to save a life with whatever resources she had available. "Yes," he said. "We're going to stop him." Saturday night found Ji-hoon walking through the rain-washed streets of Seoul at 2:47 a.m., his usual insomnia amplified by the knowledge that in 36 hours, he would be confronting Director Kang with evidence of corruption that could destroy both of their careers. He hadn't intended to end up outside Mercy General Hospital, but his wandering feet had carried him there anyway, drawn by some combination of curiosity and the inexplicable comfort he'd begun to associate with Serenity's workplace. The emergency room glowed with harsh fluorescent light, visible through the glass doors that separated the trauma bay from the outside world. Ji-hoon could see movement inside, medical staff in scrubs moving with the controlled urgency that characterized hospital nights. "Are you family?" The voice belonged to an older man in security uniform who had approached from the main entrance. "Sorry? Are you waiting for news about a patient? Visiting hours ended at 9, but if you're immediate family..." "No, I'm just walking. Couldn't sleep." The security guard studied him. Expensive raincoat, designer shoes, the general appearance of someone who didn't belong in this neighborhood at 3 a.m. "You might want to find somewhere else to walk, son. This isn't the safest area for tourists." "I'm not a tourist." "Then you're either police, press, or lost." Before Ji-hoon could respond, the hospital's automatic doors burst open, and a paramedic team rushed through, wheeling a gurney toward the trauma bay. He caught a glimpse of the patient. Young woman, unconscious, blood soaking through makeshift bandages. In the controlled chaos that followed, he saw Serenity emerge from somewhere inside the emergency department. Her hair pulled back severely, and her hands already gloved. She moved with the same precision he'd observed from the rooftop garden. But up close, her intensity was almost frightening. "What do we have?" Her voice carried through the glass doors. 23-year-old female, motor vehicle accident, the paramedic replied. "Lost consciousness at the scene. Possible internal bleeding. BP dropping." The doors swung closed, cutting off the rest of the medical conversation. Through the window, Ji-hoon watched Serenity examine the patient, her hands moving quickly and purposefully over vital signs, injury assessment, treatment decisions. "She's good." The security guard had moved to stand beside him, both of them watching the emergency room like it was theater. "Dr. Monroe?" Ji-hoon asked. "Best emergency physician we've had in years. Came here from Chicago, could probably work anywhere, but she stays." The guard shook his head admiringly. "Doesn't matter if it's 3 a.m. or 3 p.m. She treats every patient like they're the only person in the world." Ji-hoon watched Serenity direct 2 residents through what appeared to be a complex procedure, her movements economical and confident. Even through the glass and distance, he could see the intense focus that characterized everything she did. "Why does she stay?" he asked. "You'd have to ask her. But if I had to guess, she stays because somebody needs to, and she's somebody who doesn't walk away from things that need doing." A helicopter approached from the east, its searchlight cutting through the night rain. The trauma team began preparing for another arrival, and Serenity glanced up from her current patient, long enough to coordinate with the flight crew via radio. "Car accident on the expressway," the security guard explained. "Friday and Saturday nights are always busy, but with this rain..." The helicopter landed on the adjacent building's helipad, and Ji-hoon watched Serenity split her attention between stabilizing her current patient and preparing for the incoming trauma case. Her movements remained calm, despite the obvious pressure, and he found himself holding his breath as she made rapid-fire medical decisions that would determine whether both patients survived the night. "She'll save them both," the security guard said quietly. "Doctor, Monroe doesn't lose patients if she can help it." The second patient arrived, middle-aged man, conscious but in obvious pain. Ji-hoon watched Serenity evaluate both cases simultaneously, directing her team with the same authority she'd shown discussing Brahms' symphonic arrangements. "This is what she meant," Ji-hoon murmured. "What's that?" "About seeing people at their most real. No pretense, no games, no hidden agendas." The security guard gave him a curious look. You know Dr. Monroe? We're friends. Well, your friend is about to work straight through until sunrise. She's been here since yesterday morning, but she won't leave until both of those patients are stable. Ji-hoon checked his watch. 3:15 a.m. Serenity had been working for nearly 20 hours straight, and from the look of the trauma bay, her night was far from over. Is there somewhere I could... Wait? Maybe somewhere I could get coffee to bring to the staff. There's a 24-hour convenience store 2 blocks south. They have decent coffee. But son? Yes? If you're thinking about bothering Dr. Monroe while she's working, don't. She's got people's lives in her hands. I understand. Ji-hoon walked through the rain to the convenience store, bought 6 cups of coffee and a box of energy bars, and returned to the hospital. The security guard accepted the offerings with surprised gratitude. For the staff, Ji-hoon explained, when they have a moment. I'll make sure they get it. Dr. Monroe especially. She forgets to eat when she's in the zone. Through the emergency room windows, Ji-hoon could see that both patients had been stabilized. Serenity was documenting treatment decisions on a tablet while keeping one eye on their monitoring equipment. She looked exhausted but satisfied, the expression of someone who had fought death and won. She's remarkable, Ji-hoon said. Yes, she is, which is why it's going to be a real shame when they close this place down. The words hit Ji-hoon like a physical blow. What? Hospital's been sold. Some corporate buyout thing. We're supposed to close within the month. The security guard shook his head. 40 years I've worked hospital security, and I've never seen anything like what Dr. Monroe has built here. But apparently that doesn't matter much when there's money to be made. Ji-hoon stared through the rain-streaked glass at Serenity, who was still monitoring her patients despite 21 hours of continuous work. In a few days, if he signed Director Kang's recommendation, all of this would disappear. The trauma bay, the dedicated staff, the security guard who knew every doctor's coffee preference, all of it sacrificed for development projects and profit margins. Excuse me, Ji-hoon said abruptly. I need to make a phone call. He walked to his car and sat in the driver's seat with rain drumming on the roof, staring at his phone. So Young had given him evidence of Kang's corruption. The security guard had just given him something more powerful, a reminder of what would be lost if he chose corporate loyalty over moral responsibility. He scrolled to So Young's number and typed, "Move the legal meeting to Sunday morning. And prepare a full presentation of your findings. We're going to need more than documentation. We're going to need a plan." Her response came immediately, despite the late hour. Yes, sir. Sir? Are you sure about this? Ji-hoon looked back toward the hospital, where Serenity was still visible through the emergency room windows, still taking care of people who had nowhere else to go. I'm sure, he typed. Some things are worth fighting for. Sunday morning arrived gray and cold, the aftermath of Saturday night's rain leaving Seoul's streets slick with reflected neon. Ji-hoon arrived at the Park Healthcare Technology building at 7 a.m. to find So Young already in the conference room, surrounded by documents, laptop computers, and enough coffee to fuel a small pharmaceutical company. I've prepared 3 different presentations, she announced without preamble. Legal evidence of Director Kang's corruption, financial analysis of the actual hospital performance data, and a strategic plan for moving forward if we decide to expose him. Show me all 3. For the next 2 hours, So Young walked him through a level of corporate malfeasance that was both shocking and methodical. Director Kang hadn't simply manipulated individual hospital reports, he'd systematically altered data across Park Healthcare Technology's entire community hospital portfolio, creating false justifications for closures that would benefit his private development partnerships. The pattern is consistent, So Young explained, highlighting sections of financial documents. Inflated maintenance costs, deflated patient satisfaction scores, exaggerated competition from other facilities. 8 of the 12 hospitals on the closure list are actually profitable when you factor in their community benefit programs and government subsidies, including Mercy General, especially Mercy General. Dr. Monroe's research on emergency triage protocols has generated significant grant funding, and her patient outcomes are among the best in Seoul. Closing Mercy would actually cost us money in the long term. Ji-hoon stared at the evidence spread across the conference table. So Young, what you're showing me could destroy Kang's career. It could also trigger a government investigation into our entire company. Yes, sir. It could cost millions in legal fees, damage our stock price, and result in criminal charges against a board member. Yes, sir. Are you prepared for those consequences? So Young met his eyes directly. Sir, are you prepared for the consequences of doing nothing? Before Ji-hoon could answer, his phone buzzed with a text from Serenity. Survived the night shift. Want to grab breakfast? I know a place with excellent kimchi jjigae. He stared at the message, acutely aware that he was about to have breakfast with someone whose professional future depended entirely on decisions he would make in the next 24 hours. Decisions she knew nothing about. I'd love to, he replied. Where should I meet you? Sir? So Young was watching him carefully. Is everything all right? I'm having breakfast with Dr. Monroe. The doctor from Mercy General? Sir, given what we've discovered about her hospital, what are you suggesting? Nothing inappropriate, sir. But perhaps this would be an opportunity to gauge her thoughts about hospital administration? To understand what closure would mean to someone in her position? Ji-hoon considered the suggestion. It was manipulative, calculating, and exactly the kind of strategic thinking that corporate executives were supposed to embrace. It was also a betrayal of whatever trust he'd built with Serenity over their evening conversations. Set up the legal meeting for tomorrow morning at 8, he said finally. I'll review your presentation one more time tonight and make my final decision then. And Dr. Monroe. Dr. Monroe gets breakfast. Nothing more, nothing less. An hour later, Ji-hoon found himself in a small restaurant near the University District, watching Serenity devour kimchi jjigae with the enthusiasm of someone who hadn't eaten a proper meal in 36 hours. Long night? He asked. Motor vehicle accidents, a construction worker who fell from scaffolding, and an elderly woman who waited until 3 a.m. to mention that her chest pain had been going on for 6 hours. Serenity paused between spoonfuls of soup. But we saved them all, so I'm calling it a victory. You look exhausted. I look like someone who loves her job. She smiled, and Ji-hoon felt the familiar loosening in his chest that accompanied her genuine expressions. How was your weekend? You seemed stressed on Friday? Work complications. Nothing I can't handle. Want to talk about it? The question was innocent enough, but it landed with the weight of everything Ji-hoon couldn't tell her. How could he explain that he held her professional future in his hands? That her hospital was scheduled for closure based on falsified data? That he was falling in love with someone whose life he had the power to destroy? It's complicated, he said finally. Most important things are. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the restaurant filling with Sunday morning customers seeking hangover cures and comfort food. Ji-hoon found himself memorizing details again. The way Serenity's eyes lit up when she talked about successful surgeries. The unconscious gesture she made of checking people's pulses when she was thinking deeply. The small caduceus tattoo on her wrist that he'd never noticed before. Serenity, he said suddenly. Can I ask you something hypothetical? Hypothetical questions are the best kind. They let you explore possibilities without consequences. If you knew someone was making a decision that would affect many people's lives, and you had information that could influence that decision, would I share the information? Would you, even if it might damage your relationship with that person? Serenity set down her spoon and gave him her full attention. JH, are we talking about someone else, or are we talking about you? The directness of her question caught him off guard. Hypothetically, I believe that people have a right to make informed decisions. If I had information that could prevent harm to others, I'd have a moral obligation to share it, regardless of personal consequences. Even if it meant losing someone you cared about? Especially then. Because if someone really cares about me, they'd want me to do the right thing, even if it's difficult for both of us. Ji-hoon stared into his coffee, seeing his reflection distorted in the dark liquid. And if the person making the decision was someone you trusted? Trust isn't about blind faith, JH. It's about believing that someone will make ethical choices when it matters most. She reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. Whatever decision you're struggling with, I trust you to do the right thing. The simple gesture, her fingers warm against his skin, nearly undid him. Ji-hoon found himself on the edge of confession, the truth pressing against his throat like a physical presence. Serenity. Yes? I need you to know that whatever happens with your hospital, it's not personal. Business decisions, sometimes they're made by people who don't understand the human cost of their choices. Her expression shifted, becoming more guarded. My hospital specifically? JH, what do you know about Mercy General that I don't? Nothing concrete. Just rumors. About corporate restructuring, facility consolidations. What kind of rumors? Ji-hoon realized he'd stepped into dangerous territory. Any specific information he shared would reveal his connection to Park Healthcare Technology, but his attempt at a general warning had already raised her suspicions. The kind that suggest you might want to start looking at other opportunities, he said carefully. Just in case. Serenity pulled her hand back. JH, and I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer honestly. Okay. Do you work for Park Healthcare Technology? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Ji-hoon could feel the weight of his next words, understanding that his answer would determine not just the future of their relationship, but also his ability to gather the information he needed to make ethical decisions about her hospital. No, he said finally. I don't work for Park Healthcare Technology. It was true, technically. He didn't work for the company. He owned it. Serenity studied his face for a long moment, then relaxed slightly. I'm sorry for the interrogation. It's just that there have been rumors about corporate spies, people asking questions about our operations, our staff, our patient demographics. The administration warned us to be careful about sharing internal information. Corporate spies? People gathering intelligence for potential buyers or competitors. Hospital acquisitions can be lucrative if you know which facilities are struggling and which ones have hidden value. Like Dr. Serenity Monroe's groundbreaking research on emergency triage protocols, Ji-hoon thought. Like grant funding and government subsidies that didn't appear on Director Kang's manipulated financial reports. Has anyone approached you directly? He asked. Not yet. But if they do, they'll get a very clear message about where I stand on the corporate takeover of community healthcare. After breakfast, they walked through the university district, while Serenity pointed out places that had meaning to her. The bookstore where she bought medical journals, the small park where she ran on her days off, the music shop where she'd purchased the annotated score of Brahms' Fourth Symphony. This is my soul, she said as they paused outside a coffee shop that advertised live jazz on Thursday nights. Not the tourist version or the business district version, just the places where real people live and work and try to make a difference. Ji-hoon looked at the neighborhood through her eyes. Small shops with hand-painted signs, elderly couples sharing Sunday morning coffee, university students discussing philosophy and politics at sidewalk tables. It was a soul he'd never experienced from his penthouse apartment and corporate boardrooms. It's beautiful, he said. It's real. No pretense, no manipulation, no hidden agendas, just people being human. As they walked back toward the medical district, Ji-hoon felt the weight of his deception growing heavier with every step. Serenity trusted him, confided in him, shared her world with him, and he was lying to her about the most fundamental aspects of his identity. But he was also gathering the emotional intelligence he needed to make the right decision about her hospital. Every conversation, every shared meal, every glimpse into her dedication to community medicine was evidence that Director Kang's closure recommendations were not just corrupt, but actively harmful to the people they were supposed to serve. When they parted ways outside Mercy General, Serenity touched his arm again. JH, thank you for listening today. I know I can be intense about work, but it means a lot to have someone who understands why this matters. It does matter, he said. More than you know. As he walked back to his car, Ji-hoon realized that his relationship with Dr. Serenity Monroe had evolved beyond simple romantic attraction. She had become his moral compass, the voice of ethical responsibility that would guide his decision about Director Kang's corruption. Tomorrow morning, he would choose between corporate loyalty and human decency. Tonight, he would prepare for a confrontation that would define not just his professional future, but his ability to look at himself in the mirror without shame. Monday morning arrived with the particular tension that accompanies irreversible decisions. Ji-hoon stood in his shower at 5:30 a.m., letting hot water wash over him while he mentally rehearsed the confrontation that would begin in 2.5 hours. In his briefcase, So Young's meticulously documented evidence of Director Kang's corruption, legal assessments of their options, and a resignation letter he hoped he wouldn't need to use. His phone buzzed with a text from Serenity. Emergency shift change. Free for early coffee if you're awake. He stared at the message, recognizing a gift disguised as coincidence. Before the most important business meeting of his career, he would have one more conversation with the person whose insights had shaped his understanding of what was truly at stake. Constellation Cafe in 20 minutes? He replied. Perfect. I need caffeine and a friendly face. When Ji-hoon arrived, Serenity was already there, looking professionally exhausted in scrubs and a fleece jacket, her hair pulled back in the practical bun that meant she'd either just finished a shift or was about to begin one. Rough night? He asked, settling into the chair across from her. 3-hour surgery on a motorcycle accident victim, followed by a boardroom meeting about operational efficiency at 6 this morning. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup as if drawing warmth from it. Sometimes I wonder if hospital administrators have ever actually seen a patient. The irony wasn't lost on Ji-hoon. What kind of operational efficiency? Budget cuts disguised as quality improvements, reduced staffing, delayed equipment purchases, consolidation of services. She shook her head. They keep using phrases like strategic realignment and resource optimization to describe what basically amounts to doing less with less. Are you worried about your job? I'm worried about my patients. If they cut emergency room staffing during peak hours, people will die. It's not a possibility. It's a mathematical certainty. Serenity leaned forward, and Ji-hoon could see the exhaustion around her eyes. But apparently, patient mortality isn't factored into resource optimization calculations. The phrase hit him like a physical blow. Resource optimization, the exact terminology Director Kang had used in his hospital closure presentation. Ji-hoon wondered how many other euphemisms were being used to obscure the human cost of corporate decisions. Serenity, can I ask you something personal? Personal questions at 6 a.m. deserve honest answers. Why do you stay? You could work anywhere, private hospitals, research institutions, prestigious medical centers. Why choose the stress and frustration of community medicine? She was quiet for a moment, stirring sugar into her coffee with the careful attention she brought to everything she did. Do you remember what I told you about seeing people at their most real? In the emergency room, when everything else falls away. That's part of it. But there's something else. She looked out the cafe window toward the medical district, where the morning shift was beginning at hospitals across Seoul. In emergency medicine, you learn that there are 2 types of doctors: those who see patients as medical cases, and those who see them as human beings who happen to have medical problems. What's the difference? The difference is what happens when someone can't pay for their treatment, or when they don't speak the language, or when they're scared and alone at 3 a.m. with no family to advocate for them. Serenity met his eyes. Private hospitals can choose their patients. Community hospitals treat whoever walks through the door. Ji-hoon thought about the motorcycle accident victim she'd spent 3 hours saving, about the construction worker and the elderly woman from Saturday night, about every patient who had benefited from her dedication to treating everyone equally regardless of their ability to pay. Have you ever been tempted by offers from private facilities? Every month. The salary difference alone would be significant. She smiled, but there was something sad in her expression. But I became a doctor to save lives, not to make money. And the lives that need saving most are usually the ones that can't afford premium healthcare. That sounds like a lonely choice. It can be, Most of my medical school friends are making twice my salary at half the stress level. They have time for relationships, hobbies, vacation planning. She paused. But they also have to turn away patients who can't afford treatment, and I don't think I could live with that. Ji-hoon felt something crack inside his chest. Not painful, but significant. Like a door that had been locked for years suddenly opening. Serenity? Yes? What would you do if someone offered to fund everything you needed? Equipment, staffing, research resources, no strings attached, just someone who believed in your work? Her expression shifted, becoming more guarded. JH, we've had this conversation before. I don't mix personal relationships with hospital business. But hypothetically, I'd be suspicious of their motives. In my experience, offers that sound too good to be true usually are. Even if the person making the offer genuinely wanted to help. Especially then. Because genuine desire to help can become controlling desire to manage, and I've seen too many community programs destroyed by well-meaning benefactors who wanted to improve them according to their own vision. Ji-hoon absorbed this, understanding that her wariness came from experience, not cynicism. What if the help came without any management involvement? Just funding, no oversight. Then I'd probably assume it was either illegal money that needed laundering, or a tax write-off scheme that would disappear as soon as it became inconvenient. Serenity leaned back in her chair. JH, why are you asking these questions? Because I care about you, and I can see how hard you're working with limited resources. And nothing. I wish things were easier for you. She reached across the table and touched his hand. The same gesture that had nearly undone him during their previous conversation. The fact that you wish things were easier means more to me than any theoretical funding could. Most people don't even see community medicine as real medicine. It's the most real medicine there is. Yes, it is. Her smile was genuine now, warm and grateful. Thank you for understanding that. They sat in comfortable silence while the cafe filled with Seoul's early morning crowd. Construction workers grabbing coffee before their shifts, university students meeting study groups, medical residents like Serenity refueling between hospital rounds. JH? Serenity's voice drew his attention back to her. Can I ask you a personal question? Fair's fair. What do you do when you're not having coffee with overworked doctors? The question he'd been dreading, phrased with the casual directness that characterized everything about her. Ji-hoon realized that his carefully constructed evasions were becoming harder to maintain with each conversation. I work in healthcare administration, he said carefully. Policy analysis, resource allocation, strategic planning. For which organization? A consulting firm that works with multiple healthcare systems. It wasn't technically a lie. Park Healthcare Technology did consult for other medical organizations, but it was close enough to deception that he felt sick saying it. That sounds important. And lonely. Why lonely? Because policy analysis means making decisions about people you never meet, in situations you never see. It would be easy to forget that every statistic represents someone's life. The observation hit harder than she could have intended. How do you prevent that? The forgetting. You spend time with the people affected by your decisions. You listen to their stories, understand their struggles. Remember that behind every policy change is a human being with hopes and fears and people they love. Serenity finished her coffee and checked her watch. I need to get back to the hospital. Thank you for the early morning conversation. I needed the reminder that there are people who understand why this work matters. Serenity? Yes. Whatever happens with the hospital politics, with budget cuts and operational efficiency, don't let them change who you are. The medical world needs people like you. She stood, gathering her jacket and purse. People like me? People who see patients as human beings instead of profit centers. Her smile was radiant. I'll try to remember that when I'm arguing with administrators about supply budgets. After she left, Ji-hoon remained at the table, staring at his untouched coffee while her words echoed in his mind. Policy analysis means making decisions about people you never meet, in situations you never see. In 45 minutes, he would sit in a boardroom with Director Kang and choose between exposing corruption or protecting corporate interests. The decision would affect 12 hospitals, hundreds of medical professionals, and thousands of patients whose lives depended on access to community health care. But it would also determine whether he could continue lying to the woman he was falling in love with, or whether he would finally have to choose between his inherited empire and his emerging conscience. Ji-hoon paid for both coffees and walked through Seoul's awakening streets toward a confrontation that would define not just his professional future, but the kind of person he was willing to be. The Park Healthcare Technology boardroom felt different at 8 a.m. on Monday morning, smaller somehow, despite its floor-to-ceiling windows and panoramic view of Seoul's skyline. Ji-hoon arrived to find Director Kang already positioned at the presentation screen, his gold-rimmed glasses reflecting the morning light as he arranged documents with his characteristic precision. "Good morning, CEO Park," Kang said with his practiced smile. "I trust you've reached a decision regarding our hospital consolidation proposal." "I have." Ji-hoon took his seat at the head of the conference table, So-young's evidence file positioned carefully within reach. "But first, I'd like to review some additional information that's come to my attention." "Additional information?" "Discrepancies in your financial projections, questions about your data sources, concerns about the timing of certain property assessments." Kang's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm not sure what discrepancies you're referring to, CEO Park. My analysis has been thorough and accurate." "Has it?" Ji-hoon opened So-young's file and spread the first set of documents across the table. "Because according to these records, your projected maintenance costs for Mercy General Hospital are nearly double the amount actually budgeted with the city." "Anticipated upgrades," Kang replied smoothly. "Older facilities require significant infrastructure investment." "And this?" Ji-hoon produced the property assessment from Golden Tower Development. "Evaluation conducted 3 weeks ago by a company that hasn't been authorized to assess our properties." For the first time since Ji-hoon had known him, Director Kang looked genuinely surprised. "I'm not sure how you obtained that document, CEO Park, but property assessments are routine business practice. Routine business practice conducted before board authorization. With companies that stand to benefit from hospital closures." Ji-hoon stood, moving to the presentation screen. "Director Kang, would you like to explain why Golden Tower Development has been negotiating for Mercy General's property for 6 months, while your presentation to this board claims the closure decision is based on recent performance analysis?" The silence stretched between them like a challenge. Through the conference room windows, Seoul's morning traffic moved in predictable patterns. People traveling to jobs, appointments, responsibilities they couldn't abandon. "CEO Park," Kang said finally, "I think there may be some misunderstanding about the timeline." "There's no misunderstanding." Ji-hoon activated the presentation screen and displayed So-young's analysis. "These are your original financial reports for all 12 hospitals on the closure list. These are the modified versions you presented to the board. And these are email records showing your coordination with development companies dating back to March." Kang's composed facade cracked visibly. "Those emails are confidential internal communications. Those emails are evidence of systematic fraud designed to close profitable hospitals for personal financial gain. You have no authority to access my private communications. I have every authority to investigate potential malfeasance within this company." Ji-hoon's voice remained calm, but his hands were trembling slightly. "Director Kang, did you or did you not manipulate financial data to justify hospital closures that would benefit your external business relationships?" The question hung in the air, while Kang's mind raced through response options. Ji-hoon could see the calculations happening behind his eyes: denial, deflection, counterattack. "CEO Park, I've served this company loyally for 15 years. My analysis of hospital performance has been professional and accurate. If you have concerns about my methodology, your methodology included inflating cost projections by an average of 47%, while underreporting revenue by 32%. That's not professional analysis. That's deliberate falsification. Those numbers are incorrect. Those numbers are documented in your own emails. Ji-hoon's careful composure finally cracked. Director Kang, 8 of the 12 hospitals you've recommended for closure are actually profitable. They serve communities that have no other access to emergency medical care. They employ hundreds of dedicated medical professionals who could be working anywhere but choose to serve underserved populations. And they're still underperforming compared to our premium facilities. Because you've been systematically defunding them, reducing staffing, delaying equipment purchases, limiting supply budgets, all while claiming they're financially unsustainable. Kang stood abruptly, his professional mask slipping completely. CEO Park, you're making accusations that could destroy both of our careers. You destroyed your own career the moment you decided to profit from closing hospitals that didn't need to be closed. Those hospitals are drains on company resources. Those hospitals are lifelines for communities you've never bothered to visit. The words echoed in the conference room, carrying more emotion than Ji-hoon had intended. Kang stared at him with something approaching shock. CEO Park, your father built this company on the principle of profitable healthcare. Community sentiment doesn't change financial reality. My father built this company to provide excellent medical care. Profit was supposed to enable that mission, not replace it. Your father would have made the same decisions I'm recommending. My father would never have falsified data to manipulate board decisions. Kang fell silent, understanding finally that his position had become untenable. Ji-hoon gathered So-young's documents, his hands steady now that the confrontation had moved past denial into resolution. Director Kang, you have 2 options. You can resign immediately with a confidential severance package and non-disclosure agreement, or you can face public exposure of this corruption, along with criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. You can't prove embezzlement. The Golden Tower development contracts include personal compensation clauses tied to successful property acquisitions. That's textbook corruption. Kang sat down heavily, his gold-rimmed glasses reflecting defeat instead of confidence. What about the hospital closures? All closure recommendations based on falsified data are suspended immediately. I'll be conducting independent reviews of every facility on your list, using accurate financial information and community impact assessments. The board won't support this decision. The board will support ethical business practices, or they'll find themselves facing the same choice you're facing now. Kang removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, his movements precise even in defeat. What happens to the development contracts? They're null and void. Any developer who negotiated in bad faith with Park Healthcare Technology officials will find their future business prospects with this company significantly limited. 20 minutes later, Director Kang Min-seok walked out of the Park Healthcare Technology building with a severance check, a non-disclosure agreement, and the understanding that his career in healthcare administration had ended permanently. Ji-hoon remained in the conference room, staring out at Seoul's skyline, while the magnitude of his decision settled around him like morning mist. He'd preserved 12 community hospitals, saved hundreds of jobs, and protected thousands of patients' access to emergency medical care. He'd also completely transformed his relationship with Dr. Serenity Monroe, from careful deception to potential honesty, if he could find the courage to tell her who he really was. His phone buzzed with a text from So-young. Security has escorted Director Kang from the building. Legal is preparing documentation for the board meeting. Sir, are you all right? I'm all right, he replied. Schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning. And So-young? Yes, sir. Find out everything you can about Dr. Serenity Monroe's research on emergency triage protocols. I want to understand exactly what we almost lost. Tuesday morning's emergency board meeting began with the kind of tension that preceded either revolution or resignation. Ji-hoon entered the conference room to find 8 of Park Healthcare Technology's 9 board members already assembled, their faces displaying various combinations of confusion, concern, and barely contained anger. Board member Kim spoke first. CEO Park, we've received some disturbing reports about yesterday's confrontation with Director Kang. Before we proceed, I think we deserve an explanation. You'll have one. Ji-hoon activated the presentation screen, displaying So-young's analysis of Director Kang's falsified data. Director Kang has been systematically manipulating financial information to justify hospital closures that would benefit his private business relationships. Board member Lee leaned forward. That's a serious accusation. It's a documented fact. Ji-hoon walked them through the evidence methodically. Inflated cost projections, deflated revenue reports, unauthorized property assessments, secret negotiations with development companies. 8 of the 12 hospitals on the closure list are actually profitable when calculated using accurate data. Even if that's true, Board Member Park interjected, the strategic value of consolidation remains sound. Community hospitals operate on thin margins. Community hospitals provide services that can't be measured purely in profit margins, Ji-hoon replied. Emergency medical access, trauma response, specialized care for underserved populations. Board member Kim shuffled through the documents. The liability issues alone from falsified board presentations could expose us to regulatory investigation, which is why Director Kang has resigned and signed a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. And the development contracts? Cancelled. Any company that negotiated in bad faith will be excluded from future business opportunities. The board members exchanged glances that communicated years of shared corporate experience. Board member Lee cleared his throat. CEO Park, while we appreciate your ethical stance, the financial implications of maintaining underperforming facilities remain problematic. Our shareholders expect consistent growth. Our shareholders invested in a healthcare company, not a real estate development scheme. Nevertheless, the closure savings would have significantly improved quarterly projections, at the cost of community medical access that took decades to establish. Board member Park stood, his expression stern. CEO Park, with respect, you're allowing personal sentiment to override business judgment. Your father built this company by making difficult decisions based on financial reality. My father built this company to provide excellent medical care at sustainable profit margins. He never would have closed hospitals that were actually profitable. The margins are still thin. The margins support essential community services that generate long-term value through patient loyalty, government partnerships, and research opportunities. Ji-hoon clicked to the next slide, displaying Dr. Monroe's research citations and grant funding records. For example, Mercy General Hospital houses groundbreaking research on emergency triage protocols that has attracted international attention and significant grant funding. Closing that facility would eliminate research assets worth millions in future development opportunities. Research assets? Board member Kim looked genuinely surprised. That wasn't mentioned in Director Kang's analysis. Director Kang's analysis omitted any information that contradicted his closure recommendations. Ji-hoon spent the next hour walking the board through everything So Young had discovered. Community benefit programs that provided tax advantages, government subsidies tied to serving underserved populations, medical education partnerships with universities, research initiatives that enhanced Park Healthcare Technology's reputation in the international medical community. The financial picture is significantly more complex than Director Kang presented, he concluded. These hospitals aren't just medical facilities. They're community assets that generate value in ways that don't appear on quarterly profit statements. Board member Lee studied the revised financial projections. If these numbers are accurate, the closure savings would be minimal compared to the potential losses in grants, subsidies, and community partnerships. The numbers are accurate. I've had them independently verified by 3 different accounting firms. Board member Park leaned back in his chair. CEO Park, assuming we accept your analysis, what's your recommendation moving forward? Full operational reviews of all 12 hospitals using accurate financial data. Investment in infrastructure improvements where needed. Strategic partnerships with universities and research institutions to maximize the value of our community healthcare assets. And if the reviews show that some facilities really are unsustainable, then we develop transition plans that protect community access while transferring patients and staff to alternative facilities. We don't simply close hospitals and sell the properties to developers. The board fell silent, processing the implications of Ji-hoon's proposal. Through the conference room windows, Seoul's business district hummed with activity. People making decisions, solving problems, building futures. Board member Kim spoke first. CEO Park, your proposal requires significant upfront investment in facilities that may never generate premium returns. It requires investment in facilities that serve essential community needs while generating sustainable returns and long-term strategic value. And if our shareholders question the decision, we explain that ethical business practices and community responsibility are compatible with profitable operations. Board member Lee nodded slowly. The regulatory advantages alone, avoiding investigation, maintaining government partnerships, preserving community goodwill, those have significant value. Exactly. Board member Park stood again. CEO Park, I need to ask directly, is this decision based on business analysis, or is it based on personal involvement with someone connected to these hospitals? The question hit the conference room like a thunderclap. Ji-hoon felt every eye in the room focusing on him. 8 corporate minds calculating the implications of compromised objectivity. My decision is based on accurate financial analysis, ethical business practices, and the long-term strategic interests of Park Healthcare Technology, he said carefully. That doesn't answer my question. It's the only answer that's relevant to this board. Board member Park held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough. The vote was 6 in favor, 2 abstentions. All hospital closures based on Director Kang's recommendations were suspended pending independent review. Infrastructure investment proposals would be developed for each facility. Community partnership opportunities would be explored. After the board members left, Ji-hoon remained in the conference room with So-young, who had been taking minutes throughout the meeting. Sir, she said quietly. Board member Park's question. Was he asking what I think he was asking? He was asking whether I'm personally involved with someone at one of the hospitals. Are you? Ji-hoon looked out at Seoul's skyline, toward the medical district where Dr. Serenity Monroe was probably beginning her morning rounds. I'm personally involved with the idea that healthcare decisions should be made by people who understand the human consequences of those decisions. That's not exactly an answer, sir. It's the answer I'm comfortable giving right now. So-young gathered her notes. Sir, for what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. Even if it was influenced by personal considerations, especially then. The best business decisions are the ones that account for human factors, not just financial projections. That evening, Ji-hoon sat in his penthouse apartment, staring at his phone while composing and deleting text messages to Serenity. How do you tell someone that you've just saved their workplace while lying about your identity? How do you explain that every conversation you've shared has been shaped by corporate secrets you couldn't reveal? Finally, he typed, Are you free for dinner tomorrow? I have something important to tell you. Her response came quickly. Of course. Everything all right? It will be, he replied. After tomorrow, it will be. Wednesday evening found Ji-hoon pacing the length of his penthouse apartment, rehearsing conversations he might never have the courage to begin. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, Seoul glittered in the darkness, while inside, the weight of accumulated deceptions pressed against his chest like a physical presence. At 7:15, his doorbell chimed. Through the security monitor, he saw Serenity standing in the hallway, wearing a simple black dress and carrying the leather satchel that contained her ever-present medical journals. She looked beautiful and trusting, and Ji-hoon felt like a fraud. This is beautiful, she said, when he opened the door, looking past him into the apartment's minimalist elegance. Though it's exactly what I would have expected from someone in healthcare consulting. The casual comment hit harder than she intended. Every assumption she'd made about his life was about to be revealed as carefully constructed deception. Thank you for coming, he said, hanging her coat in the entry closet. Can I get you something to drink? Wine, coffee, water. Wine would be lovely. Red, if you have it. Ji-hoon opened a bottle of Burgundy, probably more expensive than most people spent on groceries in a month, and tried to remember how to make normal conversation with someone whose trust he was about to either earn or destroy completely. How was your day? He asked, pouring wine into glasses that caught the apartment's recessed lighting. Interesting, actually. Serenity settled onto his leather sofa, tucking her legs beneath her in a gesture that made his formal living room suddenly feel like home. We had a staff meeting about hospital restructuring. Apparently, there have been some major changes in the Park Healthcare Technology Administration. Ji-hoon's hand froze halfway to his wine glass. What kind of changes? Executive resignation, policy reversals, suspension of facility closure recommendations. She sipped her wine thoughtfully. The administration seemed genuinely surprised by the developments. Apparently, the new CEO is taking a very different approach to community healthcare than his predecessor. New CEO? Well, not new exactly, but newly committed to different priorities. Serenity looked around his apartment, taking in the expensive furnishings and original artwork. JH, can I ask you something? Of course. How much do you know about Park Healthcare Technology's recent policy changes? The question was casual enough, but Ji-hoon caught the underlying sharpness. Dr. Serenity Monroe was intelligent, observant, and increasingly suspicious about his vague answers regarding his professional life. Why do you ask? Because in my experience, healthcare consultants usually have insights into major corporate restructuring, and the changes at Park Healthcare are significant enough that anyone working in Seoul's medical sector would have heard about them. Ji-hoon set down his wine glass, understanding that the conversation he'd planned for after dinner was beginning whether he was ready or not. Serenity, there's something I need to tell you about my work. I'm listening. It's more complicated than I've explained. She set down her own glass, her posture shifting into the alertness that characterized her approach to medical emergencies. How complicated? I don't work for a healthcare consulting firm. What do you do? I work for Park Healthcare Technology. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Ji-hoon watched emotions play across Serenity's face. Confusion, realization, hurt, anger. You work for the company that was trying to close my hospital. Yes. In what capacity? The question was asked with surgical precision, designed to extract truth without allowing room for evasion. I'm the CEO. Serenity stared at him for a long moment, her honey-colored eyes reflecting betrayal and calculation in equal measure. You're Ji-hoon Park. Yes. The man who's been having coffee with me, asking questions about my work, learning about my hospital. You're the person who had the power to destroy everything I've dedicated my life to protecting. Yes. She stood abruptly, moving toward the windows that overlooked Seoul's glittering skyline. How long have you known? About the closure recommendations, about my hospital being on the list. Since before we met. Since before we met. She repeated the words like a medical diagnosis, processing their implications. So every conversation we've had, every question you've asked about Mercy General, every expression of interest in my work, all of it has been corporate intelligence gathering. No. The denial came out more forcefully than Ji-hoon intended. Serenity, please let me explain. Explain what? How you lied about your identity while gathering information about a hospital you were planning to close? How you manipulated me into trusting you while preparing to destroy my workplace? The hospital was never going to be closed. Because of information you gathered from me. Because the closure recommendations were based on falsified data that had nothing to do with our conversations. She turned from the window, her expression combining hurt and professional skepticism. Ji-hoon, do you understand what you've done? I told you about our operations, our challenges, our resources. I shared information about our staff, our patient populations, our research. If you were planning to close Mercy General, everything I said could have been used against us. I wasn't planning to close anything. I was trying to understand. You were lying to me. The words echoed through his apartment with the force of absolute truth. Ji-hoon stood frozen, watching the woman he'd fallen in love with process the magnitude of his deception. Serenity, please sit down. Let me explain what actually happened. What actually happened is that you lied about who you are while gathering intelligence about my hospital. What actually happened is that I trusted someone who was deceiving me from the moment we met. I never intended to hurt you. Intent doesn't matter when the result is the same. She moved toward the entry closet where he'd hung her coat. I need to leave. Please don't go. Not until you understand. Understand what? That you saved my hospital after lying to me for weeks? That I should be grateful for your deception because it ended with a favorable outcome. Ji-hoon stepped between her and the door, not to prevent her leaving but to ensure she heard what he needed to say. The closure recommendations were based on systematically falsified financial data. Director Kang was manipulating hospital performance reports to justify closures that would benefit his private business relationships. I discovered his corruption and exposed it. Your hospital was never in real danger of closure because it's actually profitable and strategically valuable. And our conversations? The questions you asked about community medicine, about resource limitations, about my research? Helped me understand what would be lost if hospitals like yours were closed for profit instead of genuine performance issues. Serenity studied his face, her medical training evident in how she evaluated the truth of his statements. So you're saying that lying to me actually helped you make better decisions? I'm saying that getting to know you helped me understand the human cost of corporate decisions. By deceiving me about your identity and your power to affect my life. Yes. The simple acknowledgement seemed to surprise her. She'd expected continued justification, not honest admission of wrongdoing. Ji-hoon, do you understand why I can't continue this relationship? Because I lied to you. Because you had the power to destroy my workplace while pretending to be someone who cared about me personally. Because every conversation we've had has been fundamentally dishonest. Because I can never know whether your interest in me was genuine or strategic. My interest in you was never strategic. How would I know that? How would you know that? When someone lies about the most basic facts of their identity, everything else becomes questionable. She pulled on her coat, her movements precise and controlled despite the emotional devastation Ji-hoon could see in her eyes. Serenity, please. Please what? Please forgive the deception? Please trust the person who's been lying to me for weeks? Please accept that corporate manipulation is acceptable as long as it ends favorably? Please let me earn back your trust. She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. Ji-hoon, trust isn't something you earn back. Trust is something you either maintain or lose, and once it's lost, it can't be rebuilt. Not with the same foundation. Maybe something new could be built, but it would have to start from complete honesty. No more lies, no more strategic omissions, no more corporate secrets masquerading as personal relationships. I can do that. Can you? Because being completely honest would mean acknowledging that you used me to gather information about my hospital, regardless of your intentions. It would mean accepting responsibility for betraying my trust in service of corporate objectives, even if those objectives eventually aligned with my interests. Ji-hoon felt the weight of her words settling into his chest like stones. You're right. I know I'm right. The question is whether you're willing to live with that truth. After she left, Ji-hoon stood in his empty apartment, surrounded by expensive furniture and original artwork that suddenly felt like monuments to isolation. On his dining room table, her wine glass sat half empty, reflecting the recessed lighting like a small amber beacon. He picked up his phone and scrolled to her contact information, typing and deleting messages that all sounded like inadequate justifications for inexcusable behavior. Finally, he set the phone aside and walked to his piano, a Steinway grand that had been his father's, rarely played since he'd inherited the company and the responsibilities that came with it. He sat at the bench and began playing Brahms' Symphony No. 4, the piece that had been playing the night they met. The melody filled his apartment with memories of that first conversation, her observations about the oboe solo, the genuine smile she'd given when he'd thanked her for the company. That night, he'd walked home knowing that something had changed in his carefully controlled existence. Tonight, he understood what he'd lost by trying to control it. Thursday morning brought gray skies to Seoul and an email to Ji-hoon's personal account from an address he didn't recognize. Anonymous, tip2025@protonmail.com. Mail to anonymous, tip2025 via protonmail.com. Mr. Park. Your recent decision regarding hospital closures has not gone unnoticed by certain parties who invested significant resources in development opportunities. Some people don't appreciate losing profitable arrangements due to corporate ethics. You might want to be careful about your evening activities, particularly your coffee dates in the university district. A concerned observer. Ji-hoon stared at the message, his coffee growing cold as the implications settled around him. Someone had been watching his meetings with Serenity. Someone with enough information to know his schedule, enough resources to track his movements, and enough motivation to issue veiled threats about corporate retaliation. His phone buzzed with a call from So Young. "Sir, we need to talk. In person, not in the office." "What's wrong?" "I'd rather not discuss it over the phone. Can you meet me at the cafe near your apartment? The one with outdoor seating?" 20 minutes later, Ji-hoon found So Young at a corner table, her laptop closed and her usual professional composure replaced by barely controlled anxiety. "Sir, I've been monitoring communications since Director Kang's resignation, looking for any signs of retaliation or corporate espionage. And this morning I discovered unauthorized access to your personal email account, your calendar system, and your corporate security logs. Someone's been tracking my activities? Someone with sophisticated technical capabilities has been monitoring your movements for at least 2 weeks. They know about your meetings with Dr. Monroe, your visits to Mercy General Hospital, your evening activities in the university district." The anonymous email suddenly felt less like harassment and more like evidence of organized surveillance. Who has access to that kind of information? Either someone with inside knowledge of our security systems, or someone with external resources significant enough to conduct professional-grade corporate espionage. Golden Tower Development? Possibly. Or other developers who lost potential opportunities when you canceled the hospital closure plans. So, Young opened her laptop and showed him a series of log files. The access patterns suggest multiple users coordinating surveillance activities. This isn't individual retaliation. It's organized corporate intelligence gathering. Ji-hoon thought about Serenity walking alone through Seoul's streets after their confrontation last night, unaware that her safety might be compromised by her association with him. So Young. What kind of threats are we talking about? Professional retaliation, legal challenges, or physical danger? I don't know, sir. But I think we should assume the worst and prepare accordingly. Meaning you should probably warn Dr. Monroe that her association with you might have put her at risk. The suggestion hit like a physical blow. Ji-hoon had already destroyed his relationship with Serenity through deception. Now he had to contact her again to suggest that his corporate decisions might have made her a target for retaliation. "Sir, are you all right?" "I need to call her." "Dr. Monroe? If someone's been surveilling my activities, they know about her involvement with me. She deserves to know that she might be in danger because of corporate politics she had nothing to do with." So, Young nodded grimly. "Sir, I hate to ask this, but given the sensitivity of the situation, are you certain that Dr. Monroe isn't connected to the surveillance herself?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that someone with detailed knowledge of hospital operations and corporate vulnerabilities would be valuable to competing interests. If someone wanted to gather intelligence about Park Healthcare Technologies' community hospital portfolio, a relationship with a dedicated emergency room physician would provide significant access to information." The implication was like ice water in his veins. "You're suggesting that Serenity was using me to gather corporate intelligence?" "I'm suggesting that we should consider all possibilities when dealing with organized surveillance and corporate espionage." Ji-hoon thought about every conversation he'd had with Serenity. Her questions about healthcare policy, her interest in his work, her detailed knowledge of hospital administration challenges. Had she been gathering intelligence while he'd been falling in love? "No," he said finally. "Absolutely not." "Sir, So Young. I've seen Dr. Monroe work. I've watched her save lives, fight for her patients, struggle with limited resources to provide excellent medical care. She's not a corporate spy. She's a dedicated physician who trusted the wrong person. How can you be certain?" Because if she were gathering intelligence about Park healthcare technology, she would have been much more subtle about it. And because her reaction to learning my true identity was genuine hurt and betrayal, not strategic calculation. So Young closed her laptop, accepting his judgment. Then we need to warn her about the surveillance without revealing any additional corporate secrets that could be used against her. We need to do more than warn her. We need to ensure her safety. Sir, with respect, Dr. Monroe made it clear last night that she doesn't want continued contact with you. Pushing for involvement in her security could appear to be harassment or manipulation. The observation stung because it was accurate. Serenity had ended their relationship because of his deceptions. Continuing to contact her about corporate dangers could seem like another attempt at manipulation. What do you recommend? Anonymous warning. Enough information to make her aware of potential risks without revealing the source or compromising her further. Ji-hoon considered the option. Anonymous warnings were exactly the kind of corporate games that had destroyed his credibility with Serenity. But if organized interests were targeting her because of her association with him, she deserved protection, even if she never forgave him for the circumstances that created the danger. Draft something, he said finally. Professional, informative, focused on safety precautions without corporate details. Yes, sir. That afternoon, Dr. Serenity Monroe received an email at her hospital account. Dr. Monroe. Recent corporate restructuring in Seoul's healthcare sector has created tensions among various business interests. Some individuals with connections to hospital development projects may view medical professionals as sources of information about facility operations and strategic planning. We recommend exercising additional caution regarding sharing detailed information about hospital operations with unfamiliar individuals, meeting with people who express unusual interest in healthcare administration, discussing internal hospital communications outside secure professional settings. These are precautionary suggestions based on industry intelligence. Your safety and professional security are important to Seoul's medical community. Seoul Medical Professional Alliance. The message was carefully crafted to provide useful information without revealing its source or creating panic. It also avoided any reference to Ji-hoon personally, allowing Serenity to make her own decisions about the level of risk she faced. That evening, Ji-hoon sat in his apartment, staring at his phone while debating whether to text Serenity directly about the surveillance. Every draft message sounded like manipulation or harassment. Every attempt at explanation seemed like another layer of corporate deception. Finally, he set the phone aside and returned to his piano, playing Brahms' Symphony No. 4 again, while Seoul's lights twinkled beyond his windows. The melody that had brought them together now served as a requiem for trust destroyed by necessary lies, and love, complicated by inherited power. In the university district, Serenity was reading the anonymous security warning for the third time, her medical mind analyzing its implications, while her heart wondered whether the man she'd trusted and lost was somehow still trying to protect her from dangers she didn't fully understand. Friday morning found Serenity in Mercy General's break room at 5:30 a.m., staring at the anonymous security warning on her phone, while vending machine coffee grew cold in her hands. The message's careful phrasing suggested professional intelligence gathering, but its timing, arriving less than 48 hours after her confrontation with Ji-hoon, felt far from coincidental. You're here early, even for you. Dr. Patricia Williams, Mercy General's head of cardiology and Serenity's closest friend, settled into the adjacent chair with her own cup of questionable coffee. Couldn't sleep, Serenity replied, closing the email. Too much on my mind. Hospital politics or personal complications? Both. Neither. Everything. Patricia studied her with the clinical attention that made her an excellent cardiologist. Want to talk about it? Serenity hesitated. Patricia knew about her coffee meetings with J.H., but not about his true identity or corporate position. Explaining the situation would require revealing details about Park Healthcare Technology's internal operations, information that the anonymous warning suggested she should protect. I discovered that someone I was getting to know hadn't been entirely honest about their work situation. Married? Worse, Corporate. Patricia laughed. Serenity. Half the eligible men in Seoul work for corporations. That's not exactly a disqualifying characteristic. It is when the corporation in question has been making decisions about this hospital without consulting the people who work here. Ah. Patricia's expression shifted to understanding. Healthcare administration romance. That's complicated. That's an understatement. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Seoul wake up beyond the break room's small window. Mercy General was beginning its daily rhythm. Morning shift changes, patient rounds, the controlled urgency that characterized hospital life. Serenity, can I ask you something as both your friend and your colleague? Of course. Are you struggling with the ethics of the situation or with the hurt of being deceived? The question cut to the heart of Serenity's sleepless night. Both. I told him things about our operations, our challenges, our patient populations. If he was gathering intelligence for corporate decision-making, did he ask for that information, or did you volunteer it? I volunteered it. But he encouraged the conversations, asked follow-up questions, expressed interest in community medicine. So he might have been genuinely interested in understanding your work, or he might have been strategically gathering information to support business decisions. Patricia sipped her coffee thoughtfully. Serenity, in cardiology, we often see patients whose symptoms could indicate multiple conditions. The key is understanding which explanation fits all the available evidence. Meaning that if someone was strategically gathering intelligence about hospital operations, they probably wouldn't reveal their deception voluntarily. The fact that he told you the truth suggests that his motivations were more complex than simple corporate espionage. Serenity considered this. Ji-hoon had revealed his identity during a conversation she'd initiated about corporate restructuring. He could have continued the deception indefinitely if his primary goal had been information gathering. But he still lied to me for weeks. Yes, he did. The question is whether that lie was malicious or protective. What's the difference? Malicious lies are designed to harm or exploit. Protective lies are designed to avoid causing harm, even when they're ethically problematic. Serenity's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, the head nurse. Trauma case incoming. Your expertise needed. She stood, gathering her coat and stethoscope. Patricia, what would you do if you discovered that someone you cared about had been lying to you about something fundamental? I'd try to understand why they felt the lie was necessary, and I'd ask myself whether I could build something honest with them going forward, even if the foundation was compromised. And if you couldn't trust them again, then I'd acknowledge what we'd shared while accepting that it couldn't continue. But I wouldn't let corporate politics prevent me from making the right choice for myself. The trauma case turned out to be a construction accident. A worker who'd fallen from scaffolding with multiple injuries requiring immediate surgery. Serenity spent the morning in the operating room, her hands steady and her mind focused on saving a life, while her heart processed Patricia's advice about trust, deception, and the difference between malicious and protective lies. During her break between surgeries, she found herself in the rooftop garden where she'd first brought Ji-hoon to see her Seoul, the real city beyond corporate towers and business districts. The herb garden looked different now, colored by knowledge of who had sat beside her on that metal bench, what power he'd held over her workplace, what secrets he'd been carrying during their conversation about rosemary, sage, and mint. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Ji-hoon's number. She stared at the screen until it stopped ringing, then immediately regretted not answering. 2 minutes later, it rang again. This time, she answered. Hello, Serenity. Thank you for taking my call. His voice carried the same warmth that had attracted her during their first conversation at the charity concert, but now she heard it through the filter of everything she knew about corporate deception and strategic communication. What do you need, Ji-hoon? I need to warn you about something that has nothing to do with our personal situation and everything to do with your safety. My safety? Corporate surveillance. Someone's been monitoring my activities, including my meetings with you. There may be retaliation attempts against people perceived as having influenced my recent business decisions. Serenity felt pieces clicking into place. The anonymous security warning I received yesterday? You received a warning from the Seoul Medical Professional Alliance, suggesting I be cautious about sharing hospital information with unfamiliar individuals. That wasn't from me, but I'm glad someone thought to warn you. Serenity, I'm concerned that your association with me might have put you at risk from people who lost money when I canceled the hospital closure plans. She sat on the metal bench where they'd shared their first real conversation, looking out over Seoul while processing this new layer of complication. Ji-hoon, are you calling because you're genuinely concerned about my safety, or because you're looking for an excuse to continue contact after I ended our relationship? The directness of her question was met with several seconds of silence. Both, he said finally. I'm genuinely concerned about your safety, and I'm looking for any reason to hear your voice again. But the safety concern is real and immediate, regardless of my personal motivations. His honesty was unexpected. The Ji-hoon she'd known had been careful with information, strategic in his revelations. This admission of mixed motivations felt different. What kind of safety concerns? Organized surveillance by people with resources and motivation to retaliate against anyone they perceive as having cost them profitable opportunities. I don't know if they'll limit themselves to intelligence gathering or escalate to harassment or worse. And you think I'm a target because of my relationship with you? I think you're a target because someone has been watching us, documenting our meetings, and gathering information about your role at the hospital. Whether that surveillance was preparation for retaliation or simple intelligence gathering, you deserve to know about it. Serenity processed this information through the lens of her medical training. Assess the threat, evaluate the options, make decisions based on available evidence. Ji-hoon, I appreciate the warning, but I need you to understand that accepting your concern about my safety doesn't change my position regarding our relationship. I understand. Do you? Because I can't tell the difference between genuine concern and strategic manipulation when the person expressing concern has already demonstrated that they're willing to deceive me for corporate purposes. I wasn't deceiving you for corporate purposes. You were gathering information about community healthcare while concealing your position as CEO of a major healthcare corporation. That's corporate espionage, regardless of your personal feelings. The accusation hung in the air while Seoul's sounds drifted up from the streets below. Traffic, construction, the rhythms of a city conducting business. You're right, Ji-hoon said finally. I was gathering information while concealing my identity. I was using our relationship to understand community healthcare issues that I needed to address as CEO. That was corporate espionage disguised as personal interest. Again, his admission surprised her. She'd expected justification, not acknowledgement. So why are you warning me about surveillance risks? If our relationship was strategically motivated, why do you care about my safety? Because somewhere between our first conversation about Brahms and our last conversation about trust, I fell in love with you. And because people I love don't deserve to be in danger because of my corporate decisions, even if they can never forgive me for those decisions. Serenity felt her breath catch. Throughout their relationship, Ji-hoon had been careful with emotional declarations, strategic in his vulnerability. This statement was unguarded in ways that seemed completely genuine. Ji-hoon, I'm not telling you that to manipulate you into reconsidering our relationship. I'm telling you that because you asked for complete honesty. And that's completely honest. Complete honesty would also include acknowledging that you used me to gather information that influenced your business decisions. Yes, I used our conversations to understand what would be lost if community hospitals were closed for profit instead of performance issues. Your insights about emergency medicine, about serving underserved populations, about the human cost of corporate efficiency, all of that influenced my decision to investigate the corruption behind the closure recommendations. So I helped you save my own hospital without knowing it. You helped me understand why saving community hospitals mattered more than maximizing profit margins. Serenity stared out at Seoul's skyline, seeing the city through new eyes. The corporate towers that had once seemed impersonal now housed real people making decisions that affected real lives. The medical district that had felt isolated from business concerns was actually deeply interconnected with corporate politics. Ji-hoon, I need to ask you something. and I need you to answer with complete honesty. Okay. If I hadn't existed, if you'd never met me, would you still have stopped the hospital closures? The question was asked with surgical precision, designed to determine whether his ethical decisions had been motivated by love or principle. I don't know, he said finally. Meeting you made me understand the human cost of corporate decisions in ways I'd never considered before. Without that understanding, I might have signed the closure recommendations and accepted Director Kang's analysis as accurate. So your feelings for me influenced your business judgment? Yes. That's either very romantic or very problematic, depending on your perspective. What's your perspective? Serenity considered the question while watching Seoul's evening lights begin to twinkle in the gathering darkness. My perspective is that business decisions should be based on accurate information and ethical principles, not on personal relationships. But my perspective is also that the best leaders are the ones who understand the human consequences of their choices. Can both things be true? I think they have to be, because the alternative is either heartless corporate calculation or compromised decision-making based on personal bias. They talked for another 20 minutes about surveillance precautions, corporate politics, and the complicated intersection of business ethics and personal relationships. When they ended the call, Serenity remained in the rooftop garden, processing everything she'd learned about trust, deception, and the difference between malicious manipulation and protective lies. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. How are you processing the corporate romance complications? Still processing, she replied. But I think I'm beginning to understand the difference between strategic deception and principled secrecy. Care to elaborate? Strategic deception is designed to gain advantage over others. Principled secrecy is designed to protect others while you figure out how to do the right thing. And which category does your JH fall into? Serenity looked out at Seoul's glittering skyline, toward the corporate towers where Ji-hoon was probably working late, trying to repair the corporate damage caused by his ethical decisions. Still figuring that out, she replied to Patricia. But I think I'm beginning to understand the difference between strategic deception and principled secrecy. And which category does your JH fall into? Maybe both, maybe neither. Maybe it doesn't matter as much as I thought it did. Care to elaborate? Serenity stood from the bench, gathering her medical bag and heading back toward the hospital where her evening shift was beginning. I think the real question isn't whether he deceived me, but whether I can build something honest with him going forward. Sounds like you've made a decision. I've made a decision to make a decision. There's a difference. When? Tomorrow. After I finish a very long conversation with someone who owes me complete honesty about corporate surveillance, personal feelings, and the intersection of business ethics and human relationships. Good luck. Thanks. I'll need it. Saturday morning's Seoul Times carried a headline that sent shockwaves through the city's business district. Park Healthcare Technology CEO exposes internal corruption, saves 12 community hospitals. Ji-hoon sat in his penthouse apartment at 6 a.m., reading the article while rain streaked his windows, and his phone buzzed with calls from reporters, board members, and business associates whose opinions he no longer cared about. The story was accurate, if incomplete. So Young had worked with their public relations team to craft a narrative that exposed Director Kang's corruption while protecting confidential details about the investigation. Park Healthcare Technology emerged looking ethical and responsible, while Ji-hoon was portrayed as a principled CEO who prioritized community healthcare over profit margins. What the story didn't mention was the personal cost of his decision. His phone rang, displaying his father's contact information. Chairman Park had been traveling in Japan when the corruption scandal broke, but Ji-hoon knew this conversation was inevitable. Father. Ji-hoon. Chairman Park's voice carried the weight of 40 years in corporate leadership. I've been reading interesting news about your recent business decisions. I assume you have questions. I have questions about your judgment. Exposing internal corruption was necessary, but the public relations approach suggests deeper changes in company philosophy. Ji-hoon looked out at Seoul's awakening skyline. the company philosophy needed deeper changes. Based on what analysis? Based on the understanding that healthcare companies should prioritize patient care over real estate development. Healthcare companies should prioritize sustainable business practices that enable long-term patient care. Agreed. Which is why I stopped the closure of profitable hospitals that were being misrepresented as financial liabilities. Chairman Park was quiet for several seconds. Ji-hoon, I talked to medical professionals about their work. I learned about the human cost of corporate efficiency measures. And I realized that some business decisions can't be evaluated purely through financial analysis. Chairman Park sighed. Ji-hoon, your mother and I built this company on the principle that excellent medical care and profitable business operations were complementary goals. We never sacrificed one for the other. I'm not sacrificing profitability. I'm defining it more comprehensively. By maintaining hospitals with thin profit margins? By maintaining hospitals that generate long-term value through community partnerships, research opportunities, and medical education programs. And if the board disagrees with your expanded definition of value? Ji-hoon considered his answer carefully. Then the board will need to find a CEO who shares their narrower definition of success. Are you threatening to resign? I'm committing to ethical leadership, even if it conflicts with short-term profit maximization. After ending the call with his father, Ji-hoon sat in his apartment's silence, processing the magnitude of what he'd implied. He was prepared to resign from Park Healthcare Technology rather than compromise his newly developed principles about community healthcare and corporate responsibility. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. His doorbell chimed, a sound that had become less rare since he'd started living beyond the confines of corporate isolation. Through the security monitor, he saw Serenity standing in the hallway, wearing scrubs and a determined expression that suggested this conversation wouldn't be casual. "Thank you for coming," he said when he opened the door. "Thank you for inviting me. Though I should mention that I'm here for complete honesty, not social pleasantries." Understood. She entered his apartment with the purposeful energy that characterized her approach to medical emergencies. "Ji-hoon, I've been thinking about our situation for the past 36 hours, and I need answers to questions you probably won't enjoy answering." "Ask them." Serenity settled onto his sofa with the direct posture of someone conducting an interview. "First question. When you met me at the charity concert, did you know I worked at Mercy General?" "No. I learned that later, when I researched you after our first conversation." "Why did you research me?" "Because I was attracted to you and wanted to understand who you were." "And when you learned I worked at a hospital on the closure list, what was your initial reaction?" Ji-hoon sat across from her, maintaining eye contact, despite the discomfort of complete honesty. "My initial reaction was concern that continuing our relationship would create a conflict of interest." "But you continued it anyway." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I wanted to spend time with you. And because I told myself that getting to know you better would help me make better decisions about community healthcare." "So you rationalized personal desire as professional research?" "Yes." Serenity made a note in the small notebook she'd brought with her, the same one where she recorded patient protocol ideas. Second question. During our conversations, were you consciously gathering information for corporate decision-making? Sometimes. When you talked about hospital operations, resource limitations, patient demographics, I was processing that information through the lens of business decisions I would need to make. And when we talked about music, books, your family background, that was personal. I wanted to know you as a person, not as a source of professional intelligence. Can you distinguish between those two types of conversation in retrospect? Ji-hoon considered the question. Not always. The personal and professional became interconnected in ways I didn't anticipate. Which brings me to my third question. Are you in love with me? Or are you in love with the idea of being the kind of person who falls in love with a community hospital doctor? The question hit like a surgical instrument, precise and devastating. I don't understand the distinction. The distinction is whether your feelings are about me specifically, or about the version of yourself that my work represents. Corporate executives who fall for idealistic professionals often fall for their own reflection in someone else's principles. Ji-hoon stared at her, recognizing the psychological sophistication behind her inquiry. How would I know the difference? You'd know the difference if you could love me when I'm being petty, unreasonable, or professionally frustrated. You'd know the difference if your feelings survived mundane daily interactions that had nothing to do with noble medical missions. I'd like the chance to find out. Would you? Because loving someone in real life requires dealing with corporate surveillance, professional conflicts of interest, and the ongoing complications of building a relationship with someone whose judgment you've already influenced through deception. Yes, I'd like the chance to find out. Serenity closed her notebook and looked around his apartment. The expensive furniture, the original artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Seoul like a corporate kingdom. Ji-hoon, my final question is about practical compatibility. You live in a penthouse apartment that costs more than most people make in 5 years. You make business decisions that affect thousands of people's lives. You travel in social circles where charity galas cost more than hospital equipment budgets. And I work 80-hour weeks for a salary that barely covers my student loans. I spend my free time writing grant applications and reading medical journals. My idea of entertainment is playing chess with elderly patients in the cardiac ward. Are you saying we're incompatible? I'm saying that sustainable relationships require shared values and compatible lifestyles. Right now, I'm not sure we have either. Ji-hoon leaned forward. What would it take to find out? Complete transparency about your business activities. No more corporate secrets that could affect my professional environment. No more strategic omissions disguised as personal privacy. And time spent in my world, not just visiting my hospital or having coffee in my neighborhood, but understanding what my life actually looks like on a daily basis. I can do that. Can you? Because my daily life includes 16-hour shifts, emergency surgeries at 3 a.m., grant proposal deadlines, and conflicts with hospital administrators who prioritize budget cuts over patient care. I understand. Do you? Because yesterday you were willing to resign rather than compromise your principles about community healthcare. That's admirable, but it's also the luxury of someone with enough personal wealth to make idealistic choices. Most of us don't have that option. The observation stung because it was accurate. Ji-hoon's ability to prioritize ethics over profits was enabled by his financial independence, a privilege that most healthcare professionals, including Serenity, didn't share. You're right, he said. I can afford to make principled decisions because I don't depend on my salary for survival. Which means that your ethical stance, while admirable, comes from a position of power that most people in healthcare don't have access to. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that if you want to understand my world, you need to understand what it's like to make ethical choices when your livelihood depends on institutional politics. How would I do that? Serenity stood, gathering her notebook and preparing to leave. Start by working at Mercy General for 2 weeks. Not as CEO of Park Healthcare Technology, not as a consultant or observer, but as a volunteer who follows our protocols, works our hours, and deals with our resource limitations. As what kind of volunteer? Administrative support, patient transport, equipment maintenance, whatever we need that doesn't require medical training. She paused at his door. If you can handle 2 weeks of community hospital reality without trying to fix our problems with corporate solutions, then we can discuss building something honest between us. And if I can't, then you'll understand why most relationships between executives and frontline healthcare workers don't survive the collision between idealism and practical reality. After she left, Ji-hoon stood in his penthouse apartment, looking out at Seoul's sprawling cityscape while processing her challenge. 2 weeks at Mercy General Hospital, experiencing community healthcare from the perspective of support staff rather than corporate leadership. It was either the most terrifying or the most liberating opportunity he'd ever been offered. Monday morning found Ji-hoon standing outside Mercy General Hospital at 5:45 a.m., wearing jeans and a cotton sweater instead of his usual Armani suit, carrying a thermos of coffee and a willingness to discover what Serenity's world actually looked like from the inside. Dr. Patricia Williams met him in the lobby, her expression combining professional courtesy with obvious skepticism. "Mr. Park, I understand you're interested in volunteering with our administrative support team." "That's correct. Dr. Monroe mentioned that you have some background in healthcare consulting, but I want to be clear about what this position entails. You'll be working directly with patients, families, and frontline staff. You'll see things that don't appear in corporate reports or efficiency analyses." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because healthcare consulting usually involves observing from a distance. This position requires getting your hands dirty, literally and figuratively." Patricia led him through corridors he'd never seen during his previous visits to the hospital. Behind the emergency department's public face lay a complex infrastructure of support services: patient transport, equipment maintenance, supply management, record keeping. "Your supervisor will be Marcus Chen, our head of patient services," Patricia explained. "He's been here for 12 years and has strong opinions about volunteers who think they understand healthcare better than the people who work here daily." "Understood. I hope so. Because if you're here to gather information for corporate decision-making, or if you're planning to suggest efficiency improvements based on 2 weeks of observation, Marcus will make your experience very unpleasant." They found Marcus in the patient transport equipment room, performing maintenance on wheelchairs with the focused attention that Ji-hoon usually associated with surgical procedures. "Marcus, this is J.H. Park, the administrative volunteer I mentioned." Marcus looked up from his wheelchair repair, his expression evaluating Ji-hoon with the practiced skepticism of someone who dealt with too many well-intentioned volunteers who disappeared at the first sign of genuine difficulty. "Healthcare consulting background?" Marcus asked. "Some experience with healthcare administration." "Meaning you've read reports about hospitals but never actually worked in one?" "Something like that." Marcus nodded, apparently satisfied with Ji-hoon's honest admission of inexperience. "Good. Consultants who think they understand hospital operations usually last about 3 days before they realize that real healthcare is messier than their theoretical models." For the next 8 hours, Ji-hoon learned what messier meant in practical terms. His first assignment: transporting patients between departments while wheelchairs that needed repair, elevators that moved slowly, and hallways that had been designed before modern medical equipment became standard. Mrs. Kim, 73 years old, needed transport from the emergency department to radiology for chest x-rays. What should have been a 5-minute journey became a 20-minute navigation challenge involving 2 broken elevators, 1 wheelchair with a wobbly front wheel, and Mrs. Kim's detailed commentary about her grandson's recent military service. "You're new," she observed as Ji-hoon maneuvered around a supply cart blocking the hallway. "First day. Most volunteers don't last long. Too many rules, too much heartbreak, too much real life." "What do you mean by real life?" "I mean seeing people when they're scared, in pain, fighting for their dignity in a system that treats them like medical cases instead of human beings." By lunchtime, Ji-hoon had transported 12 patients, restocked 3 supply closets, and gained a new appreciation for the physical demands of hospital work. His expensive running shoes, designed for Seoul's sophisticated fitness centers, were poorly suited for 8 hours of walking on linoleum floors. During his break, he found himself in the staff cafeteria, eating vending machine sandwiches and listening to conversations that revealed the human cost of healthcare budget constraints. "Did you hear about the CT scanner?" asked Maria, one of the radiology technicians. "Administration postponed the replacement again. We're running diagnostic equipment that's older than some of our residents." "Emergency department's worse," replied David, an orderly. "Dr. Monroe has been requesting updated defibrillation equipment for 6 months. Administration keeps saying they're evaluating cost-effectiveness." "Cost-effectiveness of life-saving equipment," Maria laughed bitterly. "Someone should evaluate the cost-effectiveness of letting patients die because we can't afford proper medical technology." Ji-hoon listened to this conversation while understanding that he had the power to approve equipment purchases that these dedicated professionals could only request and hope for. The disconnect between his corporate authority and their frontline reality was becoming impossible to ignore. After lunch, Marcus assigned him to the medical records department, where he spent 3 hours filing patient charts and learning about the administrative complexity that supported every medical decision. Each patient generates an average of 14 different forms during a typical emergency department visit, explained Janet, the records supervisor. Insurance verification, treatment authorization, medication documentation, discharge planning, follow-up scheduling, and every form has to be accurate because one mistake can delay treatment or deny coverage. How do you manage the volume? We don't, really. We just try to keep up and hope nothing critical falls through the cracks. Janet showed him a stack of insurance appeals, patients whose treatment had been initially denied by their healthcare coverage, requiring additional paperwork and advocacy to ensure they received necessary medical care. This is Mrs. Rodriguez, Janet said, indicating a thick file. Diabetic emergency. Needed immediate insulin therapy. Her insurance company claimed the treatment was experimental and denied coverage. Dr. Monroe spent 4 hours on the phone with their medical review department, advocating for a patient who could have died while we argued about paperwork. Did they approve coverage? Eventually, after Dr. Monroe threatened to involve the state insurance commissioner and the local media. But that's 4 hours she couldn't spend treating other patients. By the end of his first day, Ji-hoon had walked approximately 12 miles through hospital corridors, lifted equipment weighing several hundred pounds, and gained first-hand experience with the administrative challenges that consumed significant time and energy from medical professionals who preferred to focus on patient care. As he changed back into his street clothes in the volunteer locker room, Marcus approached him with the evaluation that would determine whether he'd be invited to return. So JH, what did you learn today? I learned that hospital work is physically demanding in ways I hadn't anticipated. What else? I learned that every patient interaction involves complex logistics that aren't visible to people who only see the medical treatment itself. And I learned that healthcare professionals spend significant time advocating for resources and coverage that should be automatically available for patient care. Marcus nodded approvingly. Most volunteers focus on the heartwarming aspects, helping people, making a difference, feeling good about community service. You noticed the systemic problems. Is that good or bad? It's realistic. Healthcare isn't a charity mission where good intentions solve everything. It's a complex system where dedicated professionals fight daily battles against inadequate resources, bureaucratic obstacles, and corporate priorities that don't always align with patient needs. Are you saying I should come back tomorrow? I'm saying you pass day 1. Whether you pass day 14 depends on how you handle the harder stuff. What's the harder stuff? Marcus smiled grimly. Tomorrow you're working with Dr. Monroe in the emergency department. You'll see what it looks like when the systemic problems you notice today directly impact someone's survival. That evening, Ji-hoon sat in his apartment, soaking his feet and reflecting on a workday that had been more physically and emotionally challenging than any corporate board meeting he'd ever attended. His phone buzzed with messages from So Young about business meetings and policy decisions, but for the first time in his professional life, those messages felt less urgent than his preparation for tomorrow's shift in Serenity's emergency department. He was beginning to understand why she'd challenged him to spend 2 weeks experiencing her world from the inside. The distance between corporate healthcare policy and frontline medical practice was measured not just in organizational hierarchy, but in fundamentally different understandings of what healthcare actually meant in human terms. Tuesday morning's emergency department shift began with a trauma case that would test everything Ji-hoon thought he understood about healthcare resource allocation and professional decision-making under pressure. At 7:23 a.m., paramedics brought in a construction worker who had fallen 3 stories from scaffolding, with multiple injuries requiring immediate coordinated response from surgery, orthopedics, and neurology departments. Ji-hoon's role was patient support, ensuring that medical equipment reached the trauma bay, that family members received information and assistance, and that the complex logistics of emergency treatment functioned smoothly behind the scenes. Transport the patient to OR2 immediately, Serenity directed, her voice carrying the calm authority that had attracted him during their first conversation. And get me the portable ultrasound machine from radiology. The portable ultrasound is in repair, Marcus reported. Has been for 2 weeks. Then get me the backup unit from cardiology. Cardiology is using their backup unit for a procedure that started an hour ago. Ji-hoon watched Serenity's face as she processed this information. 2 pieces of medical equipment that should have been available for emergency use, both unavailable due to repair delays and scheduling conflicts that reflected the resource constraints everyone had mentioned during his first day. "How long until the radiology unit is repaired?" she asked. "Administration hasn't approved the repair budget yet," Marcus replied. "They're evaluating cost-effectiveness." The phrase hit Ji-hoon like a physical blow. Cost-effectiveness evaluation for life-saving equipment, while a patient's survival depended on diagnostic capabilities that were sitting in a repair queue, awaiting corporate budget approval. "Dr. Monroe," called one of the surgical residents. "Patient's blood pressure is dropping. We need to move now." Serenity made the kind of split-second decision that defined emergency medicine. Proceed with surgery based on clinical assessment, rather than waiting for diagnostic confirmation that might not be available in time to save the patient's life. "Transport to OR2. I'll assist with the surgery and provide consultation based on clinical presentation." As the trauma team moved the patient toward surgery, Ji-hoon remained in the emergency department, processing what he'd witnessed. Medical professionals making life-saving decisions with inadequate equipment due to administrative delays. He had the authority to resolve with a single phone call. "Difficult case," observed Dr. Patricia Williams, who had been monitoring the situation. "Will he survive?" "Probably. Dr. Monroe is exceptionally skilled at working with limited resources. But the diagnostic uncertainty makes everything more complicated and risky." "How often do equipment failures affect patient treatment?" "Often enough that we've all become expert at improvisation and clinical assessment. Not often enough that patients die regularly due to equipment shortages, but often enough that we provide suboptimal care when better resources should be available." Patricia led him to the emergency department break room, where she poured coffee that was significantly better than the vending machine variety he'd been drinking. "JH, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "What's your actual background? Because your questions about resource allocation and administrative delays are more sophisticated than typical volunteer curiosity." The moment Ji-hoon had been dreading since accepting Serenity's challenge had finally arrived. Complete transparency with hospital staff, who might react negatively to discovering that their volunteer was actually the CEO, whose policies affected their working conditions. "I have more healthcare administration experience than I initially disclosed." "How much more?" "Significant policy-making authority within Seoul's healthcare sector." Patricia studied his face with the diagnostic attention she brought to cardiac patients. "Are you saying you work for the government or for a healthcare corporation?" "Healthcare corporation." "Which one?" "Park Healthcare Technology." The coffee mug stopped halfway to Patricia's lips. "You're Ji-hoon Park." "Yes." "The CEO who exposed the hospital closure corruption and saved Mercy General." "Yes." Patricia set down her coffee with deliberate care. "And you're here as a volunteer because Serenity challenged me to understand community healthcare from the perspective of frontline staff rather than corporate policy making." "And she knows you're here?" "She knows I'm here." This was her idea. Patricia leaned back in her chair, processing this information. "JH, or should I say CEO Park, do you understand what you've witnessed this morning?" "I witnessed medical professionals providing excellent care, despite equipment shortages that could be resolved through administrative decisions. You witnessed the direct impact of corporate budget policies on patient treatment outcomes." "Yes." "And you have the authority to resolve these equipment issues immediately?" "Yes." Patricia stood abruptly. "Excuse me for a moment." She left the break room, and Ji-hoon could hear her making a phone call in the corridor outside. When she returned 5 minutes later, her expression had shifted from surprise to something approaching anger. "CEO Park, I just spoke with our hospital administrator. Apparently, the repair budget for diagnostic equipment has been pending approval from Park Healthcare Technology's corporate office for 6 weeks. I wasn't aware of the specific delay. And the portable ultrasound machines that are currently in repair, those purchase orders have been submitted to your company 3 times in the past 2 months. I can look into that immediately." "Can you? Because while you've been volunteering here to understand our operational challenges, Patients have been receiving suboptimal care due to administrative delays that you have the authority to resolve. The accusation was fair and devastating. Ji-hoon had spent 2 days learning about resource constraints that he could eliminate with executive decisions he'd been too distracted to prioritize. Dr. Williams, what would you like me to do? I'd like you to approve the equipment repairs and purchases that have been sitting on your desk while you've been playing volunteer. And then I'd like you to continue volunteering, but with the understanding that experiencing our challenges isn't the same as fixing them. That afternoon, Ji-hoon spent his lunch break making phone calls to So-young about expediting equipment approvals that should never have been delayed. Within 2 hours, repair authorizations had been processed, purchase orders had been approved, and Mercy General's diagnostic equipment needs had been prioritized for immediate attention. When he returned to the emergency department, Serenity was completing post-surgical documentation for the morning's trauma case. How is he? Ji-hoon asked. He'll recover fully. The surgery was successful, despite the diagnostic limitations we faced. Patricia told you about my equipment approvals. She mentioned that some administrative delays had been resolved unusually quickly. Are you angry that I used my corporate authority while volunteering here? Serenity looked up from her paperwork. I'm conflicted. On one hand, you used your position to solve problems that shouldn't exist. On the other hand, you experienced the consequences of corporate delays before resolving them. Which response matters more? Both. The fact that you can solve these problems immediately demonstrates the power differential between corporate executives and frontline medical staff. But the fact that you waited until you experienced the consequences personally suggests that corporate decision-makers don't fully understand the impact of their administrative policies. What does that mean for your 2-week challenge? It means that you're learning what I hoped you'd learn, that healthcare administration and healthcare delivery are more interconnected than most executives realize. That evening, Ji-hoon returned to his apartment with a deeper understanding of the privilege that enabled his ethical stance regarding community healthcare. His ability to prioritize patient care over profit margins was supported by both personal wealth and corporate authority that most healthcare professionals couldn't access. But he was also beginning to understand something else. That sustainable change in healthcare required not just ethical leadership from corporate executives, but systematic reforms that addressed the resource constraints and administrative obstacles that complicated excellent patient care. As he prepared for his 3rd day of volunteering, Ji-hoon realized that Serenity's challenge was teaching him not just about her world, but about his own responsibilities as someone with the power to bridge the gap between corporate healthcare policy and frontline medical practice. Friday night arrived with the kind of emergency that tested every assumption Ji-hoon had developed about healthcare resource management and professional decision-making under extreme pressure. At 11:47 p.m., paramedics brought in 3 victims from a multi-car accident on Seoul's rain-slicked expressway, all critical, all requiring immediate surgical intervention, all arriving simultaneously at a hospital with limited operating room capacity. Ji-hoon had been working in the emergency department for 5 days, long enough to understand the normal rhythms of trauma response. This wasn't normal. This was the kind of convergent crisis that revealed the difference between adequate resources and optimal resources, between clinical competence and systematic preparedness. OR1 and OR2 are occupied with scheduled surgeries, Marcus reported to Serenity, as she performed rapid triage assessments on all 3 patients. Emergency OR3 has been out of service for 2 weeks pending equipment repairs. What about converting the cardiac catheterization lab? Doctor, Kim is performing an emergency angioplasty. Patient's been waiting 4 hours for the procedure. Ji-hoon watched Serenity process these constraints while evaluating 3 patients whose lives depended on surgical intervention that might not be available within the critical time window for optimal outcomes. Patient 1. Male, mid-20s, internal bleeding, stable but declining. Patient 2. Female, 37, head trauma, unconscious but responsive to stimuli. Patient 3. Teenage girl, multiple fractures, conscious and in severe pain. Under optimal conditions, all 3 patients would receive simultaneous surgical care from specialized teams using dedicated operating facilities. Under current conditions, Serenity would have to prioritize based on survival probability, resource requirements, and available alternatives. Transport patient 2 to neurosurgery immediately, she decided. Head trauma takes priority. Patient 3 to orthopedics for stabilization and pain management. Patient 1 remains here for monitoring while we prep OR2. OR2 won't be available for at least 90 minutes, the surgical coordinator reported. Then we monitor, stabilize, and hope his condition doesn't deteriorate faster than our surgical availability. Ji-hoon found himself assigned to patient 1, the young man with internal bleeding who was stable enough to wait, but critical enough that waiting involved genuine risk. His job was to monitor vital signs, provide comfort, and alert medical staff immediately if the patient's condition changed. "What's your name?" the patient asked, his voice weak but clear. "JH. I'm a volunteer here." "Am I going to die?" The question hit with unexpected force. In 5 days of volunteering, Ji-hoon had assisted with dozens of patients, but none had asked directly about their survival prospects while he was providing care. "The doctors here are excellent," he said carefully. "They're working to get you into surgery as soon as possible." "But am I going to die?" Before Ji-hoon could respond, patient 1's blood pressure monitor began alarming. Internal bleeding had accelerated, moving him from stable but waiting to critical and deteriorating. "Dr. Monroe!" Ji-hoon called, his voice carrying more urgency than he'd intended. Serenity appeared beside the gurney within seconds, her assessment swift and decisive. "His condition is deteriorating too rapidly to wait for OR2. We need surgical intervention immediately." "Where?" Marcus asked. "No operating rooms are available." "Emergency procedure in Trauma Bay 1. Convert it to a surgical suite." "Dr. Monroe, Trauma Bay surgery without full OR support is better than letting him die while we wait for ideal conditions." What followed was the most intense 90 minutes of Ji-hoon's life. Trauma Bay 1 was transformed into an improvised operating room using portable equipment, emergency lighting, and the kind of professional improvisation that characterized excellent healthcare under suboptimal conditions. Serenity performed surgery with instruments that were adequate rather than optimal, assisted by residents and nurses who adapted their standard procedures to accommodate space and equipment limitations. Ji-hoon's role was to maintain sterile supply flows, monitor equipment functionality, and provide whatever support was needed to keep the improvised surgical team functioning smoothly. "Suction," Serenity called, her hands moving with the precision that had impressed him during his first observation of her work. "Suction isn't working properly," the surgical technician reported. "Backup unit has been in repair for 3 weeks. Manual suction. JH. I need you to assist with irrigation while we manage bleeding control." For the next hour, Ji-hoon found himself directly involved in life-saving surgery, holding retractors, managing suction equipment, and maintaining sterile procedures under the guidance of medical professionals who were saving someone's life with whatever resources were available. "BP stabilizing," reported the anesthesiologist. "Bleeding appears controlled." "Good. Continue monitoring while we complete internal repairs." Throughout the procedure, Ji-hoon was acutely aware that this surgery was taking place in a trauma bay because operating rooms weren't available, using backup equipment because primary systems were in repair, with improvised procedures because optimal resources had been delayed by administrative decisions he had the authority to expedite. At 1:23 a.m., patient 1 was stabilized, transported to recovery, and expected to make a full recovery despite the suboptimal surgical conditions. As the trauma team cleaned up their improvised operating room, Serenity approached Ji-hoon with the expression of someone who had just fought death and won, but understood the larger systemic issues that had complicated the victory. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Exhausted. Grateful. Angry." "Angry about what?" "Angry that we had to perform surgery in a trauma bay because operating rooms weren't available. Angry that we used backup equipment because primary systems are sitting in repair queues. Angry that excellent medical professionals have to improvise around resource constraints that shouldn't exist. And angry at myself for not understanding these constraints until I experienced them personally." Serenity nodded. That's the point of this exercise. Corporate executives make policy decisions based on financial analysis and theoretical models. Frontline medical staff live with the practical consequences of those decisions every day. What would you have done if patient 1 had died while we were waiting for OR availability? We would have done everything possible to save him, documented the resource constraints that contributed to suboptimal care, and continued providing excellent treatment to the next patient who needed our help. But you would have known that his death was preventable with better resource allocation. Yes, we live with that knowledge every day. Preventable complications, delayed treatments, suboptimal outcomes, all resulting from administrative decisions made by people who don't witness the clinical consequences of resource limitations. Ji-hoon sat in the break room at 2 a.m., drinking coffee and processing what he'd experienced during the most intense night of his volunteer work. Patient 1 would recover. The surgery had been successful. The medical team had demonstrated exceptional skill under challenging conditions. But the systemic problems remained. Inadequate OR capacity, delayed equipment repairs, resource constraints that forced medical professionals to provide suboptimal care despite their best efforts and intentions. Deep thoughts? Dr. Patricia Williams joined him, looking as exhausted as he felt. I was thinking about preventable problems and systematic solutions. Such as the fact that I have the authority to approve OR expansion, expedite equipment repairs, and eliminate most of the resource constraints I've observed during the past week. But solving problems through executive authority doesn't address the underlying systemic issues that create those problems consistently. Patricia poured herself coffee. What underlying systemic issues? Healthcare financing that prioritizes cost containment over clinical outcomes. Administrative structures that disconnect policy decisions from clinical consequences. Corporate governance that treats medical facilities as profit centers rather than community health resources. And you think those issues can be addressed through corporate leadership? I think they have to be addressed through corporate leadership, because frontline medical professionals don't have the institutional authority to change systemic resource allocation policies. Even if corporate leadership is motivated by profit considerations rather than patient care priorities. Especially then, because sustainable healthcare businesses require clinical excellence, which requires adequate resource allocation, which requires corporate executives who understand the connection between administrative decisions and patient outcomes. Patricia studied him with the evaluative attention she brought to cardiac diagnoses. CEO Park, are you planning to use your volunteer experience to justify changes in Park Healthcare Technology's operational policies? I'm planning to use this experience to make informed decisions about resource allocation, equipment procurement, and facility management that support excellent patient care instead of interfering with it. And if those decisions reduce short-term profitability, then they support long-term sustainability by maintaining clinical excellence and community trust. At 3 a.m., as Ji-hoon walked through Seoul's empty streets toward his apartment, he understood that Serenity's 2-week challenge had taught him more than she'd intended. He'd learned not just about the operational realities of community healthcare, but about his responsibilities as someone with the institutional power to address systemic problems that individual medical professionals couldn't solve through dedication and improvisation alone. Tomorrow would be his final day as a Mercy General volunteer. Next week, he would return to corporate boardrooms with first-hand understanding of how executive decisions affected frontline medical practice. The question now was whether he could translate that understanding into systematic changes that supported excellent healthcare rather than simply managing costs. Monday morning found Ji-hoon back in the Park Healthcare Technology boardroom, but everything felt different. The expensive suits, the panoramic city views, the polished presentation screens, all of it seemed distant from the reality he'd experienced during 2 weeks of volunteering at Mercy General Hospital. CEO Park, board member Kim began. We've reviewed your recent policy changes regarding equipment procurement and facility maintenance. The expedited approvals represent significant budget modifications that weren't subject to normal board oversight. Emergency equipment needs don't follow normal procurement timelines, Ji-hoon replied. When diagnostic equipment failures affect patient treatment outcomes, administrative delays become medical emergencies. Nevertheless, The board has fiduciary responsibilities that require advance consultation for major expenditures. The board has fiduciary responsibilities that include ensuring our facilities can provide excellent patient care. Equipment repairs and diagnostic capabilities are operational necessities, not discretionary spending. Board member Lee shuffled through financial documents. CEO Park, the recent expenditures total $2.8 billion won across 12 facilities. These amounts require board authorization under our corporate governance protocols. These amounts represent delayed maintenance and equipment replacements that should have been approved months ago. The fact that they accumulated into large expenditures demonstrates systemic problems in our approval processes, not excessive current spending. Board member Park leaned forward. CEO Park, your recent hands-on involvement with hospital operations has been noted. However, the board is concerned that direct operational engagement may be affecting your judgment regarding corporate financial management. The accusation was diplomatically phrased but clear. The board believed his volunteer work had compromised his executive objectivity. My recent operational engagement has improved my understanding of how corporate financial management affects patient care delivery, Ji-hoon responded. Our hospitals have been providing suboptimal care due to administrative delays in equipment maintenance and resource allocation. Suboptimal compared to what standard? Board member Kim asked. Suboptimal compared to the clinical excellence our patients deserve, and our medical staff are capable of providing with adequate resources. But optimal compared to industry cost efficiency benchmarks? Industry cost efficiency benchmarks that prioritize short-term profit margins over long-term clinical outcomes and community trust. The boardroom fell silent. Ji-hoon had just directly challenged the financial philosophy that guided most healthcare corporate decision-making. Board member Lee cleared his throat. CEO Park, are you suggesting that our financial management practices are inappropriate? I'm suggesting that our financial management practices should support clinical excellence rather than interfering with it. And if clinical excellence requires expenditures that reduce profit margins, then we need to expand our definition of profitability to include long-term sustainability, community partnerships, and reputation for clinical quality. Board member Park stood, his expression stern. CEO Park, this board has a legal obligation to maximize shareholder value. Healthcare companies are businesses, not charitable organizations. Healthcare companies are businesses that succeed long-term by providing excellent medical care. Clinical quality and financial sustainability are complementary goals, not competing priorities. But when they conflict, they don't conflict if we define success comprehensively enough. CEO Park, board member Kim interjected, your recent policy changes suggest a fundamental shift in corporate philosophy. Before implementing further changes, perhaps we should discuss whether the board supports this new direction. The statement carried implicit threat. Continue this policy direction and face potential board opposition to your leadership. What new direction specifically concerns the board? Ji-hoon asked. Prioritizing operational spending over profit maximization. Expediting equipment purchases without cost-benefit analysis. Maintaining facilities that generate thin margins instead of focusing resources on high-profit services. Are you suggesting that I shouldn't prioritize patient care in my decision-making? We're suggesting that patient care and profit optimization should be balanced considerations in corporate policy making. And when they appear to conflict? Existing shareholders invested in a profitable healthcare company, not a community service organization. Ji-hoon looked around the boardroom at faces that represented decades of healthcare business experience, intelligent people who understood financial management and corporate governance, individuals whose judgment he'd relied upon throughout his career as CEO. Board members, I need to share some information about what I've learned during the past 2 weeks. He activated the presentation screen and displayed photographs he'd taken during his volunteer work. Broken equipment waiting for repair approval. Improvised surgical procedures due to inadequate OR capacity, medical professionals providing excellent care despite systematic resource constraints. This is Mercy General Hospital's emergency department performing surgery in a trauma bay because operating rooms weren't available due to repair delays we could have expedited. The board members studied the images with expressions of surprise and discomfort. This is diagnostic equipment that's been out of service for 6 weeks awaiting repair authorization that costs less than our quarterly board meeting expenses. CEO Park, board member Kim said quietly. These conditions appear substandard. These conditions are the direct result of administrative delays in approving maintenance and equipment requests that have been submitted repeatedly by dedicated medical professionals. And you believe these delays are due to corporate cost containment policies? I believe these delays are due to corporate policies that treat medical equipment as discretionary expenses rather than operational necessities. Ji-hoon clicked to the next slide. Financial analysis showing the long-term cost of delayed maintenance, patient satisfaction scores, and community trust metrics. Delaying equipment maintenance doesn't reduce costs. It increases costs through emergency repairs, staff inefficiency, and reputation damage. Our attempts to optimize short-term expenses are creating long-term financial liabilities. Board member Lee studied the financial projections. These numbers suggest that operational underinvestment is actually economically inefficient. Exactly. We're losing money by trying to save money inappropriately. And your proposed solution? Adequate operational funding that supports clinical excellence, which generates sustainable profitability through patient satisfaction, community trust, and medical professional retention. Board member Park crossed his arms. CEO Park, assuming your analysis is correct, implementing these changes will require significant upfront investment without guaranteed returns. All business investments require upfront costs. The question is whether we invest in systematic improvements that support long-term success, or continue crisis management that generates ongoing operational problems. And if the improvements don't generate proportional revenue increases, then we'll have excellent hospitals that provide outstanding patient care while maintaining financial sustainability, which should be sufficient for a healthcare company that prioritizes its medical mission. The board members exchanged glances that communicated years of shared corporate experience and varying degrees of comfort with Ji-hoon's expanded definition of business success. Board member Kim spoke first. CEO Park, your operational analysis is compelling. However, implementing these changes will require board authorization for significant budget modifications. How significant? Approximately 15 billion won over 18 months for comprehensive equipment updates, facility improvements, and operational staffing across all community hospitals. That's a substantial investment, board member Lee observed. It's a substantial investment in clinical quality and long-term sustainability, Ji-hoon replied. The alternative is continued crisis management and incremental deterioration of our medical services. And you're confident that this investment will generate proportional returns? I'm confident that this investment will support the kind of healthcare excellence that generates sustainable community trust and professional satisfaction. Board member Park leaned back in his chair. CEO Park, what happens if the board doesn't support this level of investment? The question was asked neutrally, but Ji-hoon understood its implications. Support the board's financial priorities or face potential opposition to your continued leadership. If the board doesn't support investments in clinical excellence, then the board should find a CEO who shares their narrower definition of healthcare business success. The statement created the silence that follows ultimatums. Ji-hoon had just indicated his willingness to resign rather than compromise his newly developed principles about community healthcare and corporate responsibility. Board member Kim broke the silence. CEO Park, are you threatening to resign if we don't approve your proposed investments? I'm committing to ethical healthcare leadership that prioritizes patient care and clinical excellence. If that conflicts with board priorities, then we should discuss whether there's alignment between my leadership philosophy and your corporate governance expectations. And if there isn't alignment, then we should make appropriate leadership changes that serve the company's long-term interests. After 2 hours of discussion, the board voted 6-2 to approve Ji-hoon's comprehensive investment proposal, with the understanding that clinical outcomes and patient satisfaction metrics would be closely monitored to assess the program's success. Walking out of that boardroom, Ji-hoon realized that 2 weeks of volunteering had fundamentally changed not just his understanding of healthcare administration, but his willingness to use executive authority to support the kind of medical excellence he'd witnessed among frontline healthcare professionals. 3 months after the boardroom confrontation that had transformed Park Healthcare Technologies' community hospital policies, Ji-hoon found himself back in Mercy General's emergency department at 2 a.m. on a Thursday night. Not as a volunteer, but as someone who couldn't sleep, and knew where he'd find the person whose insights had changed his understanding of ethical leadership. The hospital looked different now. New diagnostic equipment hummed efficiently in updated treatment bays. The trauma center had been expanded with 2 additional operating rooms. The staff break room featured comfortable furniture and coffee that didn't come from vending machines. Small changes that represented systematic improvements in working conditions and patient care capabilities. Through the emergency department windows, he could see Serenity documenting treatment decisions after successfully stabilizing a cardiac emergency patient. Her movements carried the same precision and intensity that had attracted him during their first conversation. But now he understood the complexity of knowledge and dedication that informed her clinical decision-making. J.H.? She'd noticed him standing outside, looking like someone who needed to have a conversation, but wasn't sure how to begin it. "I couldn't sleep," he said when she stepped outside. "Thought I might find you here." "You thought correctly." Emergency department night shift, cardiac emergency, successful treatment outcome. She pulled her fleece jacket closer against Seoul's autumn chill. "What's keeping you awake?" "Questions about whether I'm becoming the kind of person I want to be, or just someone who makes better corporate decisions." That's a complex distinction. "Want to walk while we discuss it?" They walked through the hospital's quiet corridors, past patient rooms where monitors beeped steadily, and families maintained bedside vigils, through the same hallways where Ji-hoon had learned about the practical realities of community healthcare during his volunteer work. "The equipment upgrades are working well," Serenity observed as they passed the renovated diagnostic imaging center. "Response times are faster, clinical accuracy is improved, staff satisfaction scores are higher. And patient outcomes? Measurably better. Reduced emergency room wait times, decreased diagnostic errors, improved surgical success rates." She paused outside the cardiac treatment unit. "Your investment in operational excellence is generating exactly the clinical improvements you projected. But I'm not sure whether you made those investments because you understood their necessity, or because you wanted to prove something to me." The observation was characteristically direct and uncomfortably accurate. "Does the motivation matter if the results are beneficial?" "It matters if you want to build something sustainable between us. Because relationships require authentic personal motivations, not strategic professional gestures designed to demonstrate character development." They reached the hospital's rooftop garden, where Seoul glittered below them in patterns that suggested millions of individual lives conducting their own complex struggles and small victories. "Serenity, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think it's possible for someone to change fundamentally? Or do people just develop better strategies for managing their existing characteristics?" She considered the question while looking out at the city. "In medicine, we see both kinds of change. Some patients modify their behavior to manage chronic conditions. They develop better strategies, but don't fundamentally alter their underlying health issues. Other patients experience complete physiological transformation through treatment, lifestyle changes, or medical intervention. Which type of change do you think I've experienced?" "I think you've experienced both. You've developed better strategies for ethical decision-making, but you've also fundamentally altered your understanding of what leadership means in healthcare contexts. How can you tell the difference? By observing whether your changes persist when they're inconvenient or costly. Strategic modifications disappear when they conflict with self-interest. Fundamental transformations become part of your identity regardless of external circumstances." Ji-hoon sat on the same metal bench where they'd shared their first real conversation, where he'd learned about rosemary for remembrance and sage for wisdom. "The board wanted me to slow down the equipment investments after the first quarter," he said. "Suggested that we demonstrated sufficient commitment to operational improvements and could return to more conservative spending policies." "What did you tell them?" "I told them that clinical excellence isn't a short-term demonstration project. It's an ongoing commitment that requires sustained resource allocation and systematic attention to operational quality. And And I reminded them that healthcare companies succeed long-term by earning community trust through consistent clinical performance, not by optimizing quarterly profit margins. How did they respond? They authorized continued investment in facility improvements and equipment upgrades, with the understanding that patient satisfaction and clinical outcome metrics would justify the expenditures. Serenity smiled, the genuine expression that had drawn him to her during their first evening of conversation. That sounds like fundamental transformation rather than strategic adaptation. Why? Because you defended clinical priorities when it was politically and financially inconvenient to do so. That suggests that your commitment to healthcare excellence has become part of your identity as a leader, not just a temporary adjustment in corporate policy. They sat in comfortable silence, while Seoul's sounds drifted up from the streets below. Late-night traffic, emergency sirens, the rhythms of a city that never completely rested. JH? Yes? I owe you an apology. For what? For assuming that your interest in me was primarily strategic. For questioning whether your feelings were genuine or professional. For not recognizing that your willingness to change demonstrated exactly the kind of character I claimed to value. The admission surprised him. Throughout their complicated relationship, Serenity had been consistently honest, but rarely apologetic. You had every reason to question my motivations, he said. I did lie to you about my identity while gathering information about your hospital. You concealed your identity while trying to understand the human consequences of corporate decisions you'd inherited. There's a difference between malicious deception and protective secrecy. Is there? Yes. Malicious deception is designed to gain advantage over others. Protective secrecy is designed to avoid causing harm while you figure out how to do the right thing. She turned to face him directly. Ji-hoon, you could have signed Director Kang's closure recommendations without ever meeting me. You could have maintained profitable hospital operations without investing in community healthcare improvements. The fact that you chose differently suggests that your interest in me was connected to, but not dependent on, your evolving understanding of ethical leadership. Are you saying you forgive me for the deception? I'm saying I understand why the deception felt necessary, and I respect the choices you made after you had complete information about the consequences of your corporate authority. Ji-hoon felt something loosen in his chest, not the unlocking sensation he'd experienced during their first conversation, but something deeper and more sustainable, like foundations settling into place after months of careful construction. Serenity? Yes? Would you like to have dinner tomorrow night? Not coffee, not a conversation about hospital operations or corporate ethics, just dinner between two people who have figured out how to be honest with each other. I'd like that very much. Good. And Serenity? Yes? Thank you for challenging me to understand your world from the inside. It changed everything about how I think about leadership and responsibility. Thank you for being willing to change. Most people prefer their existing perspectives to the discomfort of growth. As they walked back through the hospital corridors toward the main entrance, Ji-hoon realized that the question he'd been carrying for months, whether someone could change fundamentally or just develop better strategies, had finally been answered. He'd experienced both types of transformation simultaneously, strategic improvements in his decision-making processes, and fundamental changes in his understanding of what it meant to be a leader in healthcare. The difference between those two types of change, he now understood, was that strategic improvements were motivated by external pressures, while fundamental transformations were motivated by internal recognition of better ways to live and work. His relationship with Dr. Serenity Monroe had begun with deception disguised as strategy, evolved through confrontation and challenge, and arrived at something that felt like the foundation for building honest partnership between two people who understood the difference between loving someone for who they were and loving them for who they inspired you to become. 6 months after their first dinner as a couple committed to complete honesty, Ji-hoon and Serenity found themselves back at the charity gala where they'd first met, sitting in the same row where he'd asked if the seat was free, and discovered that freedom was more complicated than he'd ever imagined. The Seoul Philharmonic was preparing to perform Brahms's Symphony No. 4, the same piece that had provided the soundtrack to their first conversation. But everything else had changed. Park Healthcare Technology had become the model for ethical healthcare corporation management in Korea. Featured in business journals and medical publications for its innovative approach to balancing community healthcare needs with sustainable financial operations. The 12 hospitals that Director Kang had targeted for closure were now operating at full capacity with updated equipment, expanded services, and improved patient satisfaction scores. More importantly, they were serving communities that depended on their continued existence for emergency medical care, specialized treatment programs, and the kind of comprehensive healthcare support that couldn't be measured purely in profit margins. Different perspective this time, Serenity observed, adjusting the program that featured detailed information about the evening's fundraising goals for community hospital development programs. Different everything, Ji-hoon replied. Though the music will sound the same. Will it? I think we hear music differently when we understand more about the complexity that creates beautiful harmony. The observation was characteristic of how Serenity approached most topics, finding connections between immediate experience and larger patterns of meaning that informed both personal relationships and professional responsibilities. As the orchestra began tuning their instruments, Ji-hoon reflected on the journey that had brought them from that first evening's careful deception to this moment of complete transparency and mutual understanding. His phone buzzed with a text from So Young. Board meeting tomorrow approved your proposal for the Community Healthcare Excellence Initiative. Unanimous support. Congratulations, sir. The Community Healthcare Excellence Initiative represented everything Ji-hoon had learned about the intersection of corporate leadership and medical mission. A comprehensive program that provided enhanced funding for community hospitals, professional development opportunities for medical staff, and systematic improvements in operational efficiency that supported clinical excellence rather than interfering with it. Good news? Serenity asked, noticing his smile. The board approved funding for community healthcare improvements across all our facilities. Everything we discussed about systematic change and sustainable investment in clinical quality. That's wonderful. And surprising? 6 months ago, it would have been impossible. The board would have rejected any proposal that prioritized long-term clinical outcomes over short-term profit optimization. What changed? Evidence. Patient satisfaction scores, staff retention rates, community trust metrics, and financial performance data that demonstrated the business value of ethical healthcare management. So you convinced them that doing the right thing was also profitable. I convinced them that doing the right thing was the only sustainable approach to profitability in healthcare. The lights dimmed as the conductor approached the podium. Around them, Seoul's medical and business elite settled into their seats, many of them people whose perspectives on healthcare management had been influenced by Park Healthcare Technology's demonstration that community hospital investment could generate both excellent patient care and sustainable financial returns. Ji-hoon? Yes. Do you miss it? The simplicity of making decisions based purely on financial analysis without considering all the human complications. He considered the question while the orchestra began the opening movement of Brahms' Symphony No. 4. Do you miss medicine before you understood the administrative and political complexities that affect patient care? Never. Understanding complexity makes everything more difficult, but it also makes excellence possible in ways that ignorance never could. Same answer then. I don't miss the simplicity because I prefer the competence that comes from comprehensive understanding. During the intermission, they walked through the gala reception area where business leaders, medical professionals, and community advocates mingled in conversations that would have been impossible before Park Healthcare Technology had demonstrated practical alternatives to cost-cutting approaches to healthcare management. Dr. Monroe, Dr. Patricia Williams approached with her characteristic blend of professional enthusiasm and personal warmth. How are the new cardiac monitoring systems working out? Exceptionally well. Response times for cardiac emergencies are down by 32%, and diagnostic accuracy has improved significantly. The investment in updated equipment has transformed our cardiac care capabilities. And the staff response to the operational improvements? Universally positive. When medical professionals have the resources they need to provide excellent patient care, job satisfaction improves dramatically along with clinical outcomes. Patricia turned to Ji-hoon. CEO Park, I owe you an apology. When you first volunteered at Mercy General, I was skeptical about your motivations and your commitment to understanding community healthcare from the inside. Your skepticism was appropriate. Corporate executives who want to understand healthcare operations should be prepared to prove their sincerity through sustained engagement. And you certainly did that. 2 weeks of volunteer work followed by 6 months of systematic investment in community healthcare improvement. She smiled. Though I have to ask, was the volunteer experience as educational as Dr. Monroe intended it to be? More educational than she intended, I think. I expected to learn about operational challenges and resource limitations. I didn't expect to discover that my understanding of leadership was fundamentally inadequate for healthcare contexts. How so? I learned that effective leadership in healthcare requires understanding the human consequences of every administrative decision, not just the financial implications. During the second half of the concert, as the orchestra moved through the complex harmonies and intricate rhythms that made Brahms' Fourth Symphony a masterpiece of musical architecture, Ji-hoon found himself thinking about the parallels between orchestral performance and healthcare delivery. Both required individual excellence coordinated toward collective outcomes. Both demanded technical precision, enhanced by artistic sensibility. Both succeeded when each participant understood their role within a larger mission that transcended personal achievement. Most importantly, both created something beautiful and necessary that couldn't be measured purely through efficiency metrics or cost-benefit analysis. When the final notes of the symphony faded into appreciative silence, before the audience erupted in sustained applause, Serenity turned to Ji-hoon with the same genuine smile that had attracted him during their first conversation. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For asking if the seat was free, and then proving that freedom was worth the complications it created. Thank you for saying yes, and then teaching me what freedom actually required." As they joined the standing ovation for an orchestra that had transformed individual musical excellence into collective artistic achievement, Ji-hoon understood that his relationship with Dr. Serenity Monroe had followed a similar trajectory, from individual attraction to collaborative partnership that created something more valuable than either could have achieved alone. 1 year after the charity gala where their story began, Ji-hoon and Serenity were planning a different kind of public event. Their wedding, scheduled to take place in Mercy General Hospital's rooftop garden, surrounded by the herb plants that had provided the setting for their first honest conversation, and the sole skyline that represented their shared commitment to community healthcare excellence. The invitation list reflected their journey from individual professional success to collaborative impact. Medical professionals and corporate executives, community advocates and healthcare policy researchers, people whose lives had been touched by the systematic changes that Park Healthcare Technology had implemented across its community hospital network. "Are you nervous?" Patricia asked Serenity during the final preparations, as florists arranged ceremony decorations among the rosemary, sage, and mint that had grown into a substantial garden over the months of careful tending. "About getting married, or about getting married in a hospital. About building a life with someone whose world was so different from yours." Serenity considered the question while adjusting her simple white dress, elegant but practical, suitable for a ceremony that would take place outdoors in a working hospital environment. "His world isn't different from mine anymore. We've built a shared world that includes both corporate boardrooms and emergency departments, both strategic planning and patient care, both financial sustainability and clinical excellence. That sounds like a significant achievement. It sounds like what happens when two people decide that understanding each other is more important than maintaining separate professional identities." In the hospital's administrative offices, Ji-hoon was having a similar conversation with Marcus Chen, who had agreed to serve as his best man in recognition of everything he'd learned during his 2 weeks of volunteering. "Any regrets about choosing the hospital for your wedding location?" Marcus asked as they reviewed the ceremony timeline. "About choosing the place where I learned what it means to make decisions based on their impact on real people's lives? No regrets. And about marrying someone whose job involves life and death decisions that might interrupt your honeymoon? I'm marrying someone whose dedication to saving lives taught me what it means to use power responsibly. If emergencies arise, we'll handle them together. That sounds like a sustainable approach to partnership." It sounds like what happens when you find someone who makes you want to become the best version of yourself and then creates opportunities for you to practice being that person. The ceremony began at 6 p.m. as Seoul's evening light created golden illumination across the hospital's rooftop garden. Brahms's Symphony No. 4 played softly through speakers that had been discreetly positioned among the herb plants, providing the musical backdrop that had connected them during their first conversation. Ji-hoon stood beside Dr. Patricia Williams, who was officiating the ceremony in her capacity as a longtime friend who had witnessed their relationship's evolution from suspicious corporate romance to authentic partnership based on mutual respect and shared values. When Serenity appeared at the garden entrance, escorted by Marcus in recognition of his role in helping Ji-hoon understand the practical realities of hospital work, she looked like someone who belonged exactly where she was, surrounded by the medical environment where she dedicated her career to saving lives, preparing to commit to someone who had learned to use his corporate authority to support that mission. "Dearly beloved," Patricia began, "we are gathered here today to celebrate the marriage of two people who discovered that love requires not just emotional connection, but shared commitment to making the world better through the work they do together." The vows they had written reflected their journey from deception and challenge to honesty and collaboration. Ji-hoon, Serenity, you taught me that ethical leadership requires understanding the human consequences of every decision I make. I promise to continue learning from you about what it means to serve others through professional excellence, and to use whatever authority I have to support the kind of healthcare you've dedicated your life to providing. Serenity. Ji-hoon, you showed me that systemic change is possible when people with institutional power choose to prioritize community needs over personal convenience. I promise to continue challenging you to grow and to support you in using your leadership abilities to create positive change in healthcare and beyond. As they exchanged rings crafted by a Korean artisan from recycled medical equipment, stethoscope tubing transformed into symbols of their commitment to healing. The Seoul Philharmonic musicians who had volunteered for the ceremony played the oboe solo from Brahms' Fourth Symphony that Serenity had pointed out during their first conversation. "You may kiss the bride," Patricia announced, and as Ji-hoon and Serenity embraced, surrounded by friends, family, and colleagues who had witnessed their transformation from individual professionals to collaborative partners, the evening breeze carried the scent of rosemary, sage, and mint across Seoul's skyline. Later, during the reception in the hospital's community room, a space that had been renovated using funds from the Community Healthcare Excellence Initiative, So Young offered a toast that captured what everyone present had observed about the couple's unusual courtship and its impact on Seoul's healthcare community. To Ji-hoon and Serenity, who proved that the best relationships are the ones that make both people better at serving others, and that the most successful partnerships are built on shared commitment to making the world more just, more compassionate, and more healing for everyone who needs care. As guests raised their glasses, and the Seoul skyline glittered beyond the hospital windows, Ji-hoon and Serenity understood that their story had evolved from a question about whether a seat was free to a demonstration that freedom itself required the courage to change, the wisdom to grow, and the commitment to build something beautiful with someone who inspired your best efforts at becoming fully human. The hospital around them hummed with its nighttime rhythms, monitors beeping steadily, medical professionals providing excellent care with updated equipment and adequate resources, patients receiving treatment in facilities that prioritized clinical excellence because corporate leaders had learned that sustainable success required serving the communities that trusted them with their most precious resource, their health and their lives. And in the rooftop garden where herbs grew under Seoul's starlit sky, two people who had discovered that love was more complex and more rewarding than either had imagined prepared to spend their lives proving that the best partnerships were the ones that made both people more effective at creating positive change in the world around them. The question, "Is this seat free?" had been answered not just with "it is now," but with a commitment to ensure that freedom, like excellent healthcare, was available to everyone who needed it, supported by people who understood that the most important seats were the ones we made available for others to join us in the work of healing, growing, and building communities worthy of our shared humanity. If you've been moved by this story of love, transformation, and ethical leadership in healthcare, consider subscribing to support more stories that explore how personal relationships can drive positive change in the systems that affect all our lives. Because sometimes, the most powerful love stories are the ones that remind us that caring for each other extends far beyond individual romance to encompass our responsibility for creating a more just and compassionate world.